So this morning we have Joel Roberts, our board chair of CalNonprofits, and he's going to officially open the symposium. Joel is currently the CEO of Path Ventures and previously the CEO of Path. Together, Path and Path Ventures provide 2,491 affordable supportive homes and provide homeless services in 150 cities across California. Joel is a national leader in public policy related to homelessness and housing, and it's an honor to have him as our board chair and an honor to have him this morning. And I'm going to leave it to you, Joel. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning, and it's definitely an honor to be the chair of the board of directors of CalNonprofits. The CalNonprofits board represents different sectors of the nonprofit arena, and we also represent the diversity of California. I know we are beyond the shutdowns of the pandemic, but we still feel the effects of several years of this pandemic. It's stretched our staff team members. It has grown many of our nonprofits with infusion of public and private funding. It's forced us to operate differently. Many of us still operate in virtual or semi-virtual work settings. But we're now in a post-pandemic era, and that means the dramatic increases of resources has slowed down. There's a shifting of the workforce as we all are experiencing. People are moving around, staff are moving around. Inflation has caused salaries to increase faster than our revenue, and racial equity is becoming a more significant priority in our sector. So CalNonprofits is needed more than ever to help navigate this new era. And we believe the nonprofit sector is about system change and not just charity in order to transform our state. And that's why policy conventions like today is so important. So I welcome you this morning to the CalNonprofits annual policy convention. And I want to introduce to you, as I'm sure many of you already know, the amazing Jan Masaoka, our current CEO of CalNonprofits, who, if you haven't heard, is retiring at the end of this year, just in a few weeks. She's led CalNonprofits for 11 years, and she's had a significant impact in our sector for many, many years. The board believes that without her, the state of California would be much different than it is today. So I turn it over to you, Jan.
Thanks so much, Joel. What a nice introduction. I appreciate that. Well, as you just heard from Joel, I have just a couple more weeks after 11 years here at CalNonprofits, and this is sort of my farewell address. This is kind of how I'm thinking about it. So, many of you remember that 11 years ago, CalNonprofits was a low point. And when I took this job, it wasn't because CalNonprofits had such great dental benefits, although we do have good dental benefits, but because CalNonprofits was an organization with a great unrealized potential and promise for making real change for nonprofits and thereby for California. And so together over these last 11 years, we've come a long way. And I have just a couple of highlights I want to point out to you, but I don't want you to think of them as accomplishments, okay? I want you to think of them as assets that this organization has built that are then assets that can be used by each one of us individually as well as collectively. So one of them is a creation of a strong Sacramento presence for nonprofits. Many of our organizations have already had a strong presence in the arts, for example, in behavioral health, in childcare, and domestic violence, and climate change, and conservation, and in animal welfare. But it's been important for us to have kind of a representation of the nonprofit community as a whole. And I think that this presence has been led in large part by our advocate, Jennifer Fearing. And just one reflection of that is the formation in the last few years of two select committees on the nonprofit sector, one in the Assembly and one on the Senate. So these are official bodies helping us to look at our organizations and our sector and thinking about how all of us can continue to work with the select committees to make them even more effective. I think the second thing that we've created is a kind of original policy-oriented research in the causes count studies. Just a couple of things you probably have heard us say over and over again. One is that 1 in every 14 California jobs is located at a nonprofit. We hire more people than construction, more people than real estate, more people than entertainment. That of all the nonprofit hours in our state, 22% of them are volunteer hours. So we're a huge part of our workforce. In addition to that 1 in 14 jobs is also made up of our volunteer cadres. And nonprofits are often thought of as using up money in the, like using up money in California, but the fact is we bring in 40 billion, that's with the B, $40 billion a year from out of state into California. And we do that by bringing in federal money, by money from out of state foundations, like the Bill Gates Foundation, for example, or the Rockefeller Foundation. And we do it because our groundbreaking nonprofits in California raise money from individuals all over the world. So this research has been proven to be so useful and so helpful. I think we'll be continuing that in the future. And then thirdly, I think is a mobilized network. I think we really, in the last, the fact that our mobilized network, for example, in the last year was able to create the Equity and Contracting Initiative, got 550 nonprofits to sign on to it, got it through every single committee in each of the houses, as well as the full House votes without a single negative vote, although the governor only signed one of those bills, but you'll hear more about that in session 2, and is that this constituency is still ready to fight for contracting reform, philanthropic reform, and for the communities that we live in and serve. And I think that I like to think that, you know, we can be a small staffed organization because it's not really what staff do here, or even what the staff and board do, but it's this very strong network. And so many of you testified at hearings over the last year. And if we didn't call on you to call on your representatives, it means that your representatives were voting the right way anyway. So, so that's the good news, right? So then I have 3 causes of mine that I want to bring up to you. Because I have the opportunity to do. And the first one is about organizations of color. You know, to paraphrase the phrase Black Lives Matter, you know, I want to say Black organizations matter. You know, as much as it's important to have people of color, women, other marginalized community people lead nonprofit organizations, I think that the emphasis on the phrase minority-led or BIPOC-led has been a distraction. So for example, the Ford Foundation is led by a Black man, but it's not a Black organization. It doesn't, and it can never speak for the Black community the way a Black organization can. And this overlooked crucial distinction needs to focus more on organizations that have risen from and are rooted in and hold themselves accountable to communities of color, because they not only serve their communities, they are also power brokers for their communities. And that's something that a mainstream organization can't do. And let me give you an example here in San Francisco, where I live. In the olden days, you know, maybe before there was electricity, you know, something as my kids would probably think, when a mayor or political leaders in San Francisco wanted to talk to the Chinese community, find out what was going on there, maybe make a deal with them over something or another, negotiate with them, they would reach out to the families, the big families, established families. But today they reach out to Chinatown housing. Okay? And we see this in every community in our state, that the organizations that are based in communities of color are the ones that stand for their communities and are recognized as political powers, as the people you seek out to feel the feeling of the community and to make negotiations and agreements with. So I think that, so for example, in a Latino neighborhood, Kaiser Hospital may serve more Latino patients than the Latino Community Clinic, but the Latino Community Clinic is also an important employer. They keep money in that community as a local business that's there. They develop staff talent that will go on to many other locations, and they have the ability to speak for and act for the Latino community. So I'm hoping that we can think more about organizations that are rooted in their communities of color, not just who happens to lead them. The second cause I want to take up is the importance of volunteers. I think we in the staff community just consistently take volunteers for granted. And it reminds me about bees. honeybees and bees like that. We didn't think about bees all that much unless we were worried that they were going to sting us. But then I think recently, we've realized how much bees are important to our food supply. And the importance of bees in our ecosystem. And we're now realizing we need to nurture bees, we need to support bees, we need to make sure there are habitats in which bees can thrive. And right now, I think volunteers are in the same situation as bees. We are in the 23rd consecutive year of volunteerism decline in California. More than 2/3 of our volunteer centers have closed over the last 15 years. Now there's many reasons for that, but it's another indicator of this. And we don't have a strong public policy agenda for volunteerism. For example, when we think of volunteerism in public policy, people usually think, well, AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is a good and important program, as is the Conservation Corps, the foster grandparents, these other programs, but they're not volunteers. And I think that there is a difference between staff and volunteers in many of these areas. For example, if we paid all the big brothers and big sisters, they would be babysitters. There's a difference in the quality of relationship with little brothers and little sisters, with people in hospice, with children with autism, with people in immigration law cases. All of these people and causes are in many ways served better by volunteers than they ever could be by those of us who are on the staff. So I think one of the things I want to work on after leaving CalNonprofits is a public policy agenda for volunteerism, and I hope you'll consider working with me on that. And then the third thing I want to comment on is that the single most important thing next year that's going to affect not just nonprofits, but the communities that we work in and serve is who wins the presidential election. And we don't really like to say that but it's the biggest deal that's going to happen next year. And I think I would just challenge each one of us individually and collectively to think, what can I as an individual or as an organization do that we've never done before? Because this needs to be our priority. And by the way, don't ask me for any donations this year because all of my money is going to political campaigns. So I have a couple of personal notes. Joel mentioned that I'm retiring. And of course, when women get a little bit older, like say 45, people start asking them if they're retiring. And I like to quote the tennis player Serena Williams, who says that she's not retiring, she's evolving. And so I'm going to continue working on these and other causes. I'm trying to think of myself as a troublemaker without portfolio. But just in this little Academy Award moment, I do want to thank some individuals as well. And I want to thank board members who are particularly not just great board members, because all of our board members have been that, but people who have actually also been mentors and models and kind of aspirational models for me. Ashley McCumber and Linda Jacobs on the first board that hired me, LaTanya Slack, Yolanda Gorman, Chris Sinclair, Seamus Roller, and Joel Roberts. And I want to thank the funders that took a chance with us 11 years ago when there wasn't really much going on. Jim Canales, Fred Ali, Irene Wong, Bob Ross, and Fatima Angeles. And 3 staff members who were especially dear to me, Jennifer Fearing, Nancy Berlin, and Deshauna Castro. And then finally, I want to thank Jeff Green, who's not only been a great leader on the CalNonprofits board, but he's making it easy for me to leave, knowing that he's going to step into this job and take all the attacks from our policy opponents. Lead the organization towards a greater vision. So I'm going to put my personal email address in the chat in a couple of minutes. So I hope you'll stay in touch with me, as well as, of course, stay in touch with Jeff and the staff and the board members of CalNonprofits. Okay, thanks. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Elizabeth Kim. And Elizabeth has a difficult title. I have to read it. Senior Assistant Director of the Charities Division at the California State Department of Justice. She has to have extra large business cards printed to be able to fit that title on there. But I would like to say also known as the person who's in charge of nonprofits and philanthropy in the Attorney General's office. And, if you're a farmer, you know that your farm and your industry is overlooked by the Department of Agriculture and others, but nonprofits often don't know sort of where do we fit in state government? Who do we belong to? Who's in charge of us? And the answer is Elizabeth Kim and the Attorney General's Office Charities Division. And in her role, she has both the legal authority and the public platform to regulate nonprofits and to enforce regulations. And so just as some of the things her office can do, they can support nonprofits by making filing requirements easier, for example. And I'll tell you a little bit something she's done about that. They can also, of course, be incredibly annoying to nonprofits by making filing requirements harder. They can facilitate or complicate government nonprofit interactions. And they can also, an important thing they can do is to ask for information, like the donor advised fund study that they did last year. That was really an important one. And just one example of Elizabeth's only been in the job, I don't know, 15 minutes or so, but many of you know this longstanding issue of having files, your filings like the 990, for example, or the RRF1 late and delinquent and thereby not being in good standing and thereby not being, example, qualified to get money from Giving Tuesday. And so one of the things that we've been struggling with for years is that for many, many years now, 40% of California nonprofits have been delinquent in filing one or more forms. And Elizabeth and her team initiated a postcard reminder system. So it was used to be, you didn't necessarily know that you were delinquent, and that she has brought down the delinquency rate from 40% to 20%. So, I mean, that is really a huge, gigantic accomplishment. And so just one other thing I wanted to say. So she's going to give us an update, and then you can put your Q&As or your comments in the Q&A box. And Lauren and I will be helping people get through them. But I also just want to point out that Elizabeth's first job was at Swenson's Ice Cream, and she still loves ice cream. And apparently her right bicep is very big still from scooping out that hard ice cream. Okay, so with that, Elizabeth, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jan. Thank you so much for that very complex introduction and fun too. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me at this important annual symposium. I know the great work that charities in California do, and also the leadership role that CalNonprofits plays in this sector. So thanks for having me. This is a policy symposium, so I will address topics related to that. But first, Jan has asked me to, or has tasked me to demystify the California Department of Justice today, and including myself. So I will start with me. I have been a lawyer for 30 years now, and the first few years of my career was spent in private practice doing litigation work. And then in 2001, I joined the Department of Justice, first doing civil rights litigation. And then in 2007, I joined the Charitable Trusts Section, and that's where I've been since then. And I found my calling at this section. I love helping help to protect charitable assets for the people of California based on, the charity's mission or the charitable campaign. I want to help the public by doing public outreach, educational outreach, so that the public sector could do, more towards to increase their transparency and accountability, so that also increases giving towards their organization. It, builds goodwill with the community. So I want to be involved in doing, public outreach as I have done in my former role as a supervising deputy attorney general. At the Department of Justice, and I personally believe that educating communities about nonprofit governance, about the registration and reporting requirements, and about how recommendations for wise giving by the California donors. These are all very important things that the Department of Justice should do and that we are involved in doing. And so to wrap up about myself, I'm one of the board members of the National Association of State Charities Officials, which is also referred to as NASCO. So I have a really good pulse on what's going on in the nonprofit sector in the country. So now I will try to demystify the California Department of Justice as it relates to charities and fundraisers. So first there is the legal side, which is called the Charitable Trusts Section, of which I'm the new head. And then there's the Registry of Charitable Trusts, soon to be named the Registry of Charities and Fundraisers, effective January 1. We had heard that you thought the Registry of Charitable Trusts meant that only trusts have to register. So through legislative efforts, we've changed the name so that now it's self-explanatory. So the Charitable Trust Section, the legal side, we're part of the Public Rights Division at the California Department of Justice. And our section is composed of lawyers, investigative auditors, and legal analysts. The Charitable Trust Section has offices in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Now, the other component is the Registry of Charities and Fundraisers. So I'm using the new name, and that is located in Sacramento in the Department of Justice's Sacramento office on I Street. The registry has a head. The head of the registry is David Eller. He's our registrar. And the staff at the registry are divided by different programs, such as the initial registration program, the renewals program, the delinquency programs, the dissolution, raffle. So these are all different programs within the registry. There are over 105,000, so 562,000 charities actively registered in our system. So to visualize this, if you think about having like 58 counties in California, and if they were all, equally divided, and I know they're not, but if they were so equally divided, we would have about 1,800 charities in each county. So that's a lot of charities that are operating in California. And the registry staff, as to these charities and also fundraisers, are processing the filings that are being sent in addition to sending notices and correspondence back to the organizations. So my words of wisdom that I want to share with you is please avoid submitting your filings during the 2 busy months, which are May and November. So this last month, we had the registry received 22,239 pieces of mail. That's over 22,000 pieces of mail to actually physically open, take the checks, account for the checks, review, send notices if the filings are incomplete or missing filings, and upload them for public viewing. We have over 3.2 million PDF documents that are available for public viewing through the registry website. So why is May a busy month? Because the charities renewal filings are due, the RRF 1 form and with the 990 form are due 4 months and 15 days after the close of the calendar year, and that lands in May. So that's May 15th. And so why is November a busy month? Well, that's because if charity gets a 6 months extension from the IRS, that 6 months from May is November. So please file early, and also please use forms that are available on our website. We sometimes receive forms that are outdated or incorrect forms. It's probably because somebody just went on the internet, did a search for forms and used that instead of the official forms from our website. So I mentioned that we have over 3.2 million documents available for public viewing, and I hope that you all know how to search for your charity information on our website, but if you don't, let me just quickly go over. If you go to our website, which is oag.ca.gov, which stands for OAG is Office of Attorney General, so that's easy to remember. It's oag.ca.gov. Under the heading, look for a heading that says, how can we help you? And then from that heading, you'll see a heart with charities on it. You click on that, and then it'll take you to resources and tools, and click on the registry search tool. And from there, you can look up information about your charity. So now to policies. What are some proactive policies adopted by the registry to assist the charities and the public in general? Jan mentioned this. We have sent out numerous thousands and thousands of postcard reminders and notices. We are actively collecting email addresses so that we can send notices via email, which are quicker and we can do bulk emails. And the registrar staff has also recorded short webinars. If you look, you can view these webinars by clicking on the webinars from our website. It takes you to the YouTube page. And these webinars, they took time to record it, to have, appropriate page go with it. They, do the screenshot of the pages that you need to see. These are really helpful tools for you to know how to register, how to cure delinquencies, how to dissolve, etc. So we have a lot of webinars on our website. We've also changed the registry's name so that it's easier for you to, it's so intuitive that what the registry is for. And now we're in the process of modernizing our technology so that in the near future, all of you, like everyone, could electronically file the documents and also pay online. So that's something to look forward to in the near future. So before I wrap up, I want to share some new laws and regulations that have gone into effect from the charities, what we've done in the Charitable Trust Section. We have Probate Code Section 16106. That's addressing when charitable trusts have to sell all or substantially all of the assets. Prior to this implementation of this law, we had only expressly had in the corporations code when nonprofit corporations are selling all or substantially all of the assets. And now through this new probate code section, we are expressly making that a requirement for charitable trusts. We also have a new regulation section 328.1, and that applies to the sale and disposition of assets provisions for both the charitable trustees and corporations. With this new regulation 328.1, we are defining what is substantially all when you're selling or disposing of assets. We had received so many questions about what do you mean by substantially all? So we have defined it to mean 75% of the value of all assets of the charity or the trust. Excuse me, as you know, or I hope that you know, because we have reached out to all of our stakeholders, that we have made revisions to our regulations on charitable fundraising platforms and platform charities, and to the registration and reporting forms that are incorporated into these regulations. They're posted for 45-day public comments period right now. The deadline for public comments is January 2 of 2024. I hope that you provide your feedback, even if it's something, like this is great, it's much better than before, or if you feel like we need to make additional changes, we welcome your feedback. Thank you so much for having me again. And at the Department of Justice, we want to work with CalNonprofits and its members to increase our outreach for feedback from all of you so that we can provide better resources, including implementing any new laws or regulations to address new situations that may arise. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Well, let me just say my first question is, with all that mail, do you have an electric letter opener?
So I have to actually physically go there a few times so that I can see this mass operation happening. So if it's a standard envelope, we can put it through a machine that slices the top so that it opens it. But when it's bulky and different size, it's physically opened.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Right. All right. So in other words, you are still using those things that look like knives and opening.
Yeah. Yeah. You're physically opening this, different odd size envelopes.
Some traditions never die. Good to know. Thanks for your talk. We have a question for somebody in the Q&A box, which is, will the registry be allowing delinquent organizations to make electronic payments anytime soon?
Well, that is one of the things that's in the works. So currently only the entities that are current in registration could renew online and pay online. So with the modernization project that we're involved with right now, that will be allowed in the future. Please stay tuned. It's not, it may be mid-2025.
Okay, that sounds like a long way away, but of course things get closer faster than you think they're going to.
Yes.
I mean, a kind of a pet question for me, well, I guess this is a Secretary of State question maybe, but the statement of information, I think it is, SI 100, I think is has to be filed every other year on the anniversary date of your incorporation, which is of course a date that nobody remembers, and nobody can remember to do anything every 10 years, every 2 years. Is there some way that we could take some of these deadlines and group them more so that they're easier for people to remember and get filed on time?
You mean for us to somehow change our statutory deadline with whatever's the statutory deadline that Secretary.
Okay.
It's completely different entities, and I feel they serve a different purpose. So ours, is based on, we're giving you time to do your 990s, file it with the IRS, or get an extension and then subsequently file it with us. So we are going with not April 15th day, we're going with 1 month after that. Right. So our May 15th, the busy month, the first busy month is May 15th, which allows for the IRS filings and then just file with us.
Okay. How often do you talk with your boss, the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, and what would you say are his goals for the Charities Division?
Okay, so I talked to formal, meeting with him is based on, if we have something that we need to get permission from the AG to do. So that would be a meeting that we have with him. But recently I ran into him at the Sacramento office because I was in the executive suite. And so he just happened to ask about all the hundreds of thousands of things that could be going on. He happened to ask about one of the cases that we have in trial right now. So he remembers what's going on in various sections within the Department of Justice. So that was really nice seeing him in Sacramento in person, but normally it would be during a meeting for one of the actions that we're taking, or we need permission from him to do something.
And could you summarize what his goals are for your department?
Yes. Well, he is, I don't know if you saw our press releases about his, he's volunteering at various charities right now. I know he's already done, he's done Los Angeles, San Diego, and I think this Friday he's going to be at a nonprofit in San Francisco. He really wants to support charities. So for charities that are really doing good work, smaller charity, most charities are small. They have less than 2 million in revenue in California. So he wants to help them come into compliance. He wants us to help them come into compliance, to public outreach, to take efforts to make sure they are able to, cure delinquencies. And this is why I want your help to not file in May and November, so that we can help you to have your filings, uploaded faster. And but as to those bad actors that we do have in the community, whether they're fundraisers or charity board members that are not using funds the way they were supposed to be used, because the donors are giving the funds for a specific charitable reason, not to line your pocket. So he wants us to go after those bad actors. He says go after them hard, because they're not supposed to be doing that with the charitable funds the Californians donate. So the bottom line is, he likes charities. He likes the important work that they do in the state. He wants us to support them to come into compliance, but then go after hard against the bad actors.
Great, thanks for that. There's a question in the Q&A that echoes kind of a question that we have on CalNonprofits too, which is last year and the year before, your office, before you were there, did a lot of work on transparency for donor advised funds. What do you have plans to do on stuff on donor advised funds in 2024?
Well, right now we have, I don't know if there is a working group, PEGE, Exempt Organizations Council. They have a donor advised funds regulations working group that a couple of my DAGs are on it right now to see what role they can play in that one. But we continue to see whether or not this is a big issue, and what investigations we need to do, or any type of other legal remedies we need to have in place as a result of donor advised funds. So that's where we are with that.
Great, thanks. One of the questions we have also is, Is there a good way to check on the requested waiver? People sent requested waivers that wanted to dissolve by 12/31. And is there, I guess a bigger question is like, how can people contact your office when there's a, so for example, I mean, I just heard a few days ago from somebody, you know, who had filed their forms that they were delinquent on, but it's not showing up on the website, right, for a while. And so their funder is saying, but you're not showing as you're compliant on the website. So how can we give you this grant? So when people have a question like that, like they've done it, but it hasn't just gone through the system yet, is there somebody they can call or a number? What would you say?
So, okay, so I think that goes back towards like if you have a grant pending, or you know that there's a grant, you did a grant application, it really helps to not file in May and November, right? Because when we're getting like 20-something thousand pieces of mail coming in, when, you know, 50 people working on those filings, and they're not just upload, they're looking at, you know, the revenue, does it match the payment that came in? Did they check all the boxes? Is it signed? Is it missing an attachment? If they said there was self-dealing, did they do an explanation? They're doing all these checks so that it really would help us if you could avoid those May and November deadlines. And we have contact information on our website about which program to contact. It depends on the program, right? Are you dealing with initial registration that didn't happen because you need to register so that you can get grants? Are you dealing with curing delinquency? Were you like you were so delayed in your renewals that you went from delinquency to revoked that you need to now come back into reinstatement? So it really depends on the situation of the charity, right? So who you contact depends on that. But sometimes, you know, when we've gotten requests like, oh my gosh, we have we need to have the status change because we have a grant pending. We try to make that type of accommodation, but we don't want people to cut in line because other charities are waiting for their paperwork to get into play, you know, to show up and upload it. But if there are exigent circumstances, like you're going to lose your grant, then we do take that into consideration. So, like, please, not everybody jump in and say we're going to lose our grant, because then you know, how do we process that 20,000 paperwork?
I totally get the fact that you should it earlier, and like, you know, I should have started flossing my teeth 20 years ago too. But I do feel like right now we're seeing members of ours are having to call their state representatives, like their state assembly member, who's then calling your office, and that annoys everybody. Okay. So is there a phone number they could call, for example? Because there isn't one on the website. The only one is for the Attorney General's office as a whole. We have a couple.
What the appropriate number is, Jan, and then I'll share it with you, and then you can share it.
Great. Okay. And then we also have a couple more questions about donor advised funds. One of them says, is California ahead or behind other states in regulating donor advised funds in terms of transparency and accountability? I guess that's the other one. Do you have a comment about that? Because I want to say something about this, because I was at the Association of Charities, the NASCO conference last year, and you spoke at that conference, and I was very impressed by the fact that New York and California were really looking at policy issues. The Attorney General's offices were looking at policy issues, where so many of other states were still, you know, prosecuting, you know, a high school teacher who embezzled $80,000, you know, and I mean, that's a good thing to do, but the fact is that policy is really a much stronger way to stop the bad guys and help the good guys. So how would you compare what California is doing on donor advised funds to other states?
Well, I would never say that we're behind in anything. And in fact, because we had, you know, you're aware of the survey that we had done, that's leading the way as to get the feel for what is happening with donor advised funds in the community. The ones that are big ones that are operating in California, what are they doing? How is it operating? How much are they giving every year? What policies do they have in place? So I think that we're a leader in that. And I think as a result of the survey that we're doing, that is a wake-up call to other players in this realm to come up with, you know, to form committee groups to talk about how donor advised funds should be regulated.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, our time is up. Thanks, Elizabeth. Do you have any last words of wisdom or exhortation to give us?
Oh, please keep up the good work. And thank you so much for having me. Charities, I want to be there to help them, and they're doing great work in California. And like you said, they turn the economy with the amount of the revenue coming into the state, and at the same time doing good work. And I hope that with transparency, with public education, that we could educate the community about how to stay within the laws and operate within the laws.
Thanks. Well, we really appreciate having you speak to all of our folks here today, because not all government officials are open to that and make themselves open to people. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. Right. So now I'm going to introduce our next panel. I'm not going to introduce the panel. I'm just going to introduce the moderator, and he'll introduce the panelists. Chet Hewitt is the president and CEO of the Sierra Health Foundation, based in Sacramento, but really does work statewide. He's also a member of the CalNonprofits Board of Directors. And I'm hoping that his next job will be something like California state governor, or maybe like president of the United States. I think unlike so many foundation officials who also do very strong grant making work, Chet's also really an activist and a leader in the field, particularly in the area of civil rights and racial justice. So Chet is himself a superstar, and that's why he's the perfect person to lead this panel on superstar advocacy. Okay, take it away, Chet.
Thank you, Jan. This is really going to be a great session. I'm working on my technology here so I can see all. I still see on my screen, at least, the introductory slide. So hoping we can come back to the full screen. Okay, got it up and it's working. I also have a great pleasure of being moderating a panel with 4 extraordinary individuals who, as board chair Joe Roberts said, have been really responsive to the times in which we are actually living. As we move beyond the pandemic, we know that all sorts of challenges have presented themselves for nonprofits. Yes, it's partly about financing, but it's also about the social and political environment in which we are conducting our work. The 4 superstars here with us today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give them each about 5 minutes to talk a little bit about their work and their advocacy to ground us. But I will start by name. We have Mr. Michael Green, who has joined us from the Center for Environmental Health, Julie Baker from the California Arts Advocates, Lisa Masaoka, who's with Planned Parenthood, and Alberto Retana, who's with Community Coalition, group I was introduced many, many years ago when Mayor Karen Bass was there working as well. And while I don't know the other groups as well, I do know their work, which is ultimately what this is really about. We're going to start with Lisa. Lisa, I'm going to frame a question that I'm going to want everyone to answer, so the rest of you get a little bit of time to think about it. Can you talk a little bit about your advocacy and how it has changed in response to the time that we find ourselves? And I'm starting with Lisa because I think this is an issue, the issue here being reproductive rights, that we're all pretty aware of simply because of the kind of attention that it has actually drawn as well. And while we here in California think this is, probably not as important issue for us, that is not the case. So Lisa, could you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your advocacy and your issues? I'll ask all of you to do the same thing. And then we're going to talk about some of the common themes that are showing up as well. So Lisa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Matsubara. I'm the Chief Legal and Advocacy Officer at Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California. So my organization is actually the statewide public policy branch of the 7 affiliates that operate over 100 health centers throughout the state of California. Combined, they provide over 1 million patient visits to folks here in California a year. They provide services, not just sexual and reproductive health care, but everything from family planning. Some of our affiliates actually do primary care, as well as abortion services and gender affirming care. for myself, my background is I've always worked at nonprofits, and my career has been focused in public interest, mostly in the health policy space. And I think, Chet, to your question about how advocacy has changed, obviously in the work that I do with the downfall of Roe, which was a long-standing precedent that protected the constitutional right to abortion here in the United States, that has had a huge impact on the work that we do here in California. And I think, it's always really important to remember that even though we are in California and we do have a governor, administration, a legislature that is very supportive of reproductive rights, we do not live in a vacuum. And it's really important to understand that there are things that are happening at the federal level that have an impact here in California. I think the example today is the Supreme Court is taking up a case just announced this morning that will impact access to medication abortion throughout the country, and that will have an impact here. The decision in that case will have an impact in accessing medication abortion here in California, as well as in states where abortion is banned. I think I really like to think of advocacy as sort of, my philosophy is advocacy from all sides. And so it's not enough to just pass legislation. It's not enough to do the groundwork. It's not enough just to do regulatory work. I think it's really important to be creative, especially at a time when our reproductive rights are being attacked. And I think that folks have to be really creative about how to make sure that, we stay true to our mission. And I think for us, it is making sure that people can access the care that they need and deserve with dignity and without judgment, as close as they can to their homes, right? So having people having to travel or only having access for people who have the means to travel to a different state is not true access. And I do find sometimes that, when you're focusing on one sort of aspect of advocacy, a lot of times folks lose sight of whether or not whatever you did actually ends up being implemented in a way where there is an actual impact. And I really think that it's really important to think about these things in a way where you really follow through on all the policy decision making that's happening here in Sacramento, to make sure that it's actually having the impact that you intended it to have, and that there's no other, sort of unintended impacts in the community. I really liked what Jan said in her opening about, making sure that, we are thinking about sort of the folks on the ground, communities of color, people who, have generally faced barriers to, for me, accessing healthcare. It's really important to center at the margins. And for us at Planned Parenthood, we have been traditionally reproductive rights and reproductive health organization. And you can have and advocate for all the rights that you want, but if people can't actually access care, then that's not the impact that we are looking for. So I think that's kind of my takeaway here, is that really advocacy from all sides, making sure that you're really true to your mission, making sure that you are keeping in mind, what the end goal of your advocacy is, which is really for us, making sure that patients get the care that they need.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Clearly a critical issue, and really like your framing that, yes, California known as a blue state, but don't believe that that doesn't mean that, there aren't things you should be watching here as well. Alberto, I want to go to you next and talk about the work of the Community Coalition, long-standing group doing incredible work, centered in South Los Angeles. But I know some of the policy and other work that you've done actually has an impact throughout the city and county of Los Angeles as well. Talk a little bit about what you've been focused on kind of post-pandemic, and some of where you've put your superstar advocacy efforts most recently.
Sounds good. I'll keep it very broad now and dive in a little bit later. As James Baldwin said to educators famously in 1963, we are living in dangerous times, through a very dangerous time. And that seems to apply today in 2023. Unfortunately, and in very scary ways, contrary to conventional wisdom, I believe in public narratives that crises and division, crises and danger are opportunities or become moments where folks really come together. And I think that that's absolutely can be true. But what is also very true is that dangerous times can sow division. And I think we are living in very divisive times today, whether it's the road decision or whether it's the pandemic, the Middle East, you name it. It's a pretty divisive time. What we try to do at Community Coalition when we're in moments of danger or crisis, because in South Central or South Los Angeles, it seems to always feel like we're in crisis, is we really run to do unity and struggle. We strongly believe in unity and we strongly believe in struggle. Contrary to popular belief, I think, unity just is assumed it just happens naturally. But in order for unity to occur, as even a concept, division has to exist. So the act of creating unity is the act of bringing different perspectives, different people, different communities together. At Community Coalition, we've been doing that for over 30 years, and bringing Black and Brown folks together, and bringing young and old folks together, and bringing men and women together, bringing homeowners and renters together to tackle some of our most challenging issues impacting our community. And we struggle to unite. And then once we get united, we struggle against those that keep us marginal to transform the social and economic conditions in our community. So that's a little bit about who we are. That's a little bit about our general approach. We focus deeply in unity, we focus deeply in struggle, and we focus deeply on making a difference over making a statement. And so more on that a little bit later. But thanks for the opportunity to introduce ourselves.
Thanks for the introduction, Alberto. Julie, we want to go to you. And one of the things that we know that arts are a really important part of our life, not only in our personal space, but also in our community space as well. You talk a little bit about your organization and where you've put a lot of your advocacy efforts most recently.
You bet. And I think it's fascinating that we all chose a blue background, just interesting in terms of the blue state. So I'm Julie Baker. I'm the CEO of California Arts Advocates, and we are a C4 lobbying organization. We also partner with the C3 Californians for the Arts. And first of all, I just want to say I'm humbled to be a part of this group, and also that it's such a great thing that Jan and CalNonprofits have always included the arts and recognizing, and thank you, Chet, for saying that, how critical the arts are to community health and wellness. And we are really, the strategy is really to be integrated in all aspects of community, not siloed. And I would say that California Arts Advocates, as a lobbying organization established in 1996 as an all-volunteer organization, was really originally established to just try and increase funding for our state arts agency, which is called the California Arts Council. The California Arts Council was established in 1976. For 10 years, the funding at that agency was $1 million in the state of California. Even with the impact of the arts, culture, and creative industries representing over 7% of the state's gross domestic product, we were still really, really undercapitalized as a sector, and really seen sort of this vanity, nice to have, but not essential workforce. And really the advocacy, how we've shifted, and particularly because of COVID, as Alberto said, sometimes in crisis, there are opportunities. And there was a deep crisis before COVID for this workforce, but the COVID shut down the arts almost entirely, right? First to close, last to reopen is what you heard many, many times over. And so what we had to do is really activate this group of folks to recognize that they can influence what's happening in government if we organize, if we lift our voices together, and if we represent ourselves in a unified way, and talking about ourselves as essential workforce. And one of the narratives that we built during the crisis was calling ourselves artists our second responders. We're not the first people walking into a burning building and saving your life, but when you come out of that building, what restores you, what brings us together, what brings us hope and empathy and joy and meaning,
are the artists and what they bring to our communities. So we've really employed a lot of education for elected officials around who is this workforce, how diverse it is, what the needs are, and what we need to ensure that they're not just surviving, but thriving. And this really aligns with so many other organizations and what they're looking at in terms of what people need in community to thrive, whether that's access to affordable housing, whether that's access to childcare, whether that's food security, whether that's benefits and portable benefits if you're a gig worker and things like that. So, you know, our work continues to ensure that there's funding for arts and culture, specifically in the California budget, and we try to increase that. It's to recognize that artists are a critical and essential workforce to the state of California, and educating all aspects of government to see that. We've worked really closely with the Small Business Administration as well, where there were a lot of relief funds going through that. And I think also what Lisa was pointing out is how important it is for advocates to recognize that it doesn't end when you get a bill passed or you get the funding, right? The advocacy is really in the implementation and the accountability to make sure it's being the intention of what that was. So it's the work is deep, it's ongoing. And I think also, just for those who in this particular audience, for others who are in other nonprofit arts or nonprofit organizations and wondering how they can engage, when I just read in the Social Innovation Review from Stanford, was that only 31% of nonprofits in the United States engage in advocacy and lobbying. And so I think that, you know, we're missing an opportunity here in terms of influence. And it is really critical for all of us to work together, and so grateful that there is a CalNonprofits in the state to help organize that. More later, I'm sure that you'll have more questions.
Yeah, Julie, no, great. This is really great openings for everyone. I really want to just kind of underscore this notion around the intersectional nature of arts as well. As a Health Conversion Foundation, you know, we use artists to communicate, you know, during the pandemic, how people should behave, you know, and those messages delivered, particularly in BIPOC communities, were some of the most powerful and influential kind of behavior shaping mechanisms that we had. Before we had a vaccine, it was all about behavior. And I remember, because we ran that campaign in partnership with the state, played a major role. So it isn't just art on stage and screen, it's art in our lives impacting what we actually do. I want to turn quickly to you, Michael. You know, because one of the things that's really beginning to bubble up, given your work, is this notion of environmental justice, right? And how the environment is impacting the health of communities, particularly as we think about, you know, infrastructure spending and other things to kind of create a more climate resilient environment. And when you add Justice 40 into that, 40% of all those trillions of dollars going into communities that are often on the margins, we know that this is a very, very interesting time for folks working in the environmental space. Can you talk a little bit about your advocacy and where you've been putting most of your efforts most recently? And I'll just say to the panelists before, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna ask you a little bit about the future, talking about right now what's recently happened. But Michael, could you just share with us where you've been and what you're thinking most recently?
Thank you. First of all, it's such a privilege to be you know, with all of you, you know, with these kinds of folks, and the impact that you all are having. And also just CAN has done, California Association of Nonprofits has just done really important work for a long time, and especially Jan, who has been a hero forever. So I left Center for Environmental Health after 26 years at the beginning of this year. The new CEO there is Kizzy Charles Guzman. She is spectacular. And before that, I worked for Mother Teresa in Calcutta, and I worked for the Tibetan government in exile, also in India, and I worked in the US government, like at EPA. Now I get the privilege to work, so I'm working with the Just Transition Alliance, they're based in San Diego, and their whole mission is to bring labor together with environmental justice organizations for them to be able to partner to create the kind of changes that we need in our lives. And then I'm also getting to work with International Pollutants Elimination Network, IPEN, in the Bay Area, create, systemic change around companies being allowed to expose us to toxic chemicals, especially the oil and gas sector. What to me is super interesting about both those organizations is that they're focused on partnerships. They're focused on bringing folks who are in different organizations, even in different places, and coming from different lenses together. So if you think about organized labor partnering with grassroots community-based organizations, there's an ability to really create change through strategic partnerships that can't happen if those two communities are working parallel but not strategically together. And so that's one thing. And then one place that I think it's really important for us to be thinking about is defending our democratic institutions. And so there is a class of people who see government as denying them their rights. And they are, I believe, hoodwinking other people to see that too. And I think that in anything we do, whether it's in the arts or in community organizing or any place else, that or in the environment, that a piece of what we should be keeping our eyes on is how can our work not only protect our communities or inspire people, but also can be protecting the institutions that we have come to take for granted that are being targeted.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves and your more immediate work. I'm going to do kind of a real quick review. Elisa, you talked about, this notion of being preventative, of kind of like looking forward and not just kind of resting your laurels, thinking you're in a safe space. Alberto, you kind of cautioned us to be mindful of the dangerous times we're actually working in, and call this notion of unity, the ability to kind of work together, multiracial partnerships for a multiracial democracy, and really struggling with what that actually means. I loved your phrasing. You kind of struggle to get on the same page, and once you're on the same page, struggle against the things that you have in common in front of you. Lisa talked about the intersectionality and really broadening kind of a definition and how we think about arts in our lives. And then Michael talking about partnerships and strategic alliances, using the example of bringing labor and environmental justice folks together where there's really common interest. Alberto, I'm going to go back to you this next round. I want you to dig a little deeper, as you said you would, with some of the work that you're actually doing. And I want to give the folks a clear sign of some of the things that you think are on the horizon, that this framing that we've kind of collectively built would be really important to consider as we address those particular issues as well. And I'll just say, not trying to be vague here at all, but want you to speak about what you're seeing in the communities that you're working in, because my sense is these are similar issues, likely to be similar issues for other organized communities as well. And by that, I mean communities that are often least to be or last to be invested in and are existing on the margins. Alberto?
Sure. Look, the pandemic has really ravaged our communities. It has also been the greatest reveal for our country to look at inequality right in the face. And I can speak to Los Angeles because I live here. I can't speak for rural California or the Bay Area or Humboldt or San Diego, but I would probably venture to say that there was some great reveal happening in every nook and cranny across our state, across our nation, and really across the globe with the inequality that has been exposed. It's an inequality that exposed to folks who typically may have stayed on the sidelines. And I don't mean that they, rolled up their sleeves and jumped in, although some folks did do that and participate in mutual aid in ways where they went into neighborhoods they had never been in or only read about or saw on the news. Most folks don't go south of the 10 freeway in Los Angeles or get off the 110 unless you're going to go watch a football game. So I think there was a lot that has been revealed and a lot of changes that took place. The SAT was removed as a way to let folks into the university that would have never been, let alone contemplated, implemented. implemented, let alone contemplated prior to the pandemic. So there's been a lot that's been accomplished. There's been a compassion that's been built through the pandemic that didn't exist before. We also saw some of our worst behaviors with vaccinations being released in communities of color, as we thought about equity, as folks on the inside thought about first serving elders, with all the science around who to serve. But then as it began to broaden out besides our elders and it got into communities, and it said, let's try to get to communities of color, we saw white people from wealthy communities in the front of the line in these vaccination efforts. And so we saw some of our ugliest behaviors as well. Those same people probably who contributed to charitable causes, as Mary Jane Galviso talked about in the chat, moving beyond charity to justice, we're also probably getting in front of the line. So there was some contradictions in our behavior. The pandemic is also incredibly revealing, because though restaurants closed, the kitchen stayed open. And the kitchen stayed open because people of color, working class folks, immigrants were working them. So that we also know to be true. We also know to be true that folks that were underemployed and not involved in the market continue to be unemployed and out of the market. So we're talking about an immigrant class of folks that are exploited to run into the kitchen, and tons of Black folks who've been completely locked out of the market. So all of these things continue to persist as affordability continues to be a major issue. As inflation goes up and the cost of living goes up in Los Angeles, will we be able to live in our community? These are some of the major challenges that we're faced with. What does the future of our cities look like? Will the cities completely return to what they were like prior? And where do all the people of color go? Where do the working class folks go? Will we be like Stockton, where folks are living far from the city to travel an hour and a half to work to go back home? Is that the world we're living in? So to that end, I believe, and I'll just close by saying that we need to move beyond advocacy, because advocacy as a concept, right, as a noun, is that you're going to represent others, right? You're going to represent people on their behalf. I know in Spanish, a lawyer is an abogado, right? Someone who represents you. I believe that we have to move beyond advocacy to a more active role. I think everyone needs to consider themselves as activists and organizers. Will you roll up your sleeves and not only get on the fight to represent your voice and the voice of your family, but will you organize others around you to join you in that fight? That's what's needed in places like South Los Angeles, because the gap between passing a law and its implementation is not a matter of competency, it's a matter of political will. It's not a matter of skill, it's a matter of power. And whether or not a marginalized community gets the services that's deserved, again, is not a function of whether or not people or bureaucrats know what they do. It's a function of how things have operated and how communities have been served. If organizing is an incredibly important concept that we all need to embrace. If a school is dealing with a traffic issue and kids are being hit by cars, a principal can go to the city council and advocate on behalf of the school. In fact, the parents can come together and serve as traffic control. But at the end of the day, organizing would be about asking the parents, asking the students, asking the businesses about what the root causes of the problem are, developing solutions, engaging them in the process, engaging decision makers, and people advocating on their own behalf, becoming activists and organizers. That's when we'll begin to close the gap between governance and implementation. That's when we'll begin to close the gap between historically marginalized groups and those in power. Dr. King said it best: power properly understood is the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. Organizing is a vehicle for us to build that power so that will does not become the time of day or the status quo. We alter the relations of power, and we don't go backwards post-pandemic to do away with some of the changes that benefited those furthest from the university, right? Will we undo the SAT decisions that we made? Will we continue to undo the decisions we made to protect renters from being kicked out and evicted onto the street? Will we address the 60,000 folks in Los Angeles that are unhoused by looking at the root causes, or will we criminalize them? The only way we ensure that we not return to the forms of interventions prior to the pandemic is if we organize ourselves around the great reveal, around the compassion that was exposed. And there's a role for everybody, whether it's the arts or organizers or lawyers or advocates, to all unite around this common struggle.
Thank you, Alberto. You started out with this notion of inequality, which I will say is a common theme across the country. Marginalized communities or not, we are all struggling with that. And this call for us all to be activists, not just to organize, but to personally engage in behaviors that help promote a more just and equitable society is really, really important. I'm gonna come to you next, Julie, because I in this particular segment of our session, we're talking about leaning forward. Yes, there was a great reveal. We saw a lot of what had existed prior to the pandemic fully exposed by any number of factors that the pandemic gave rise to, from the lack of broadband, because that was initially how we had to sign up for vaccinations and testing, and folks that didn't have access to that simply were at the back of the line, to issues around who got to work under what conditions and so forth. For you, Julie, as you think about the arts, its role in helping to create a more just and equitable society, and this notion that Alberto's raised about being an activist in this space, more than advocacy, how are you leaning forward? What are you thinking about as you look about the months and weeks ahead?
Well, first of all, just Alberto, mic drop. I mean, everything you just said, thank you for just what you expressed. And it's a hard to follow in terms of just everything you just said and how critical it is for everyone listening to engage in this work. And I think, from our organization's standpoint, we 100% agree that the gap between what's happening in the places that hold power to what's happening in community is so huge today that if we don't organize and everybody, yes, we need advocacy organizations. Yes, we need infrastructure. We need these folks who dedicate 100% of their time to this work. But we need everybody else to recognize that they have to step up into this as well. Democracy is not just showing up to vote. Because that's not going to change the world on just who we vote into office. So everything Alberto said, I just want to put +1+1+1. In terms of the arts, I think every social justice movement has been led by artists. Artists have been not maybe led by it, but have been in the center of these movements. And it is how we actually translate this work to people to actually move them towards activation, towards activism, towards artivision, if you want to call it, some artists who are working in this way. So I think that leaning into understanding how to, and a lot of times when we talk about the arts, there's this sort of perception of, oh, we're under invested in. And I just want to get rid of that whole, it's not about money. We're not a charity. We're not standing here saying we need you to give us money. We're saying this is an underutilized workforce that should be at the center of all of these movements, but not asking artists to do this or to do this for free, because that has got to end. And that's really where we also focus our efforts, is in understanding that artwork, and this is something that the head of California Office of Small Business Advocate, Tara Lynn Gray, just wrote in a blog post, artwork is real work. And let's get rid of this notion that artists should be dedicating their lives to something they love, and therefore they should be doing it for free. Until we get to a place where artists are truly valued with investment, with the funding that they need in order to be able to do this in a way that is recognized and there is integrity and dignity in this work, we will not be able to, in our view, transform communities the way that we hope. So, that is we're always looking, that's our holy grail. How do we get there? In terms of right now, I mean, I'll be honest with you, all my lobbyists is texting me right now on freezes and state agencies or what happenings right now is what the governors. California is facing a $58 billion budget deficit. What does that mean? What does that really mean to local communities? And what does our work look like now? And I think we all have to be thinking about policies and things that shift perception and shift ways that maybe aren't just about funding. But I'll also say this about funding is that, people will say there's not enough money. And I think to Alberto's point too, which is that it's about where the priorities are, right? It's about our values and what we choose to invest in. And we have to, as a community, bring that to the folks that can make those decisions. And finally, elected officials are typically, a lot of them come from nonprofits, right? That's where a lot of folks have started. And I think that we just really need to, all of us, show up and talk to them about what matters and what they should be valuing in terms of where the investments go. So obviously for us, it is a focus on investing in arts, culture, and the creative workforce.
Michael, I want to turn to you. Similar question. Think about the work that you've been doing, kind of set the stage for in your opening remarks. Now let's look forward a little bit and think about what's next, how we advance the work.
I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about this, but I think I want to talk about love. So, Bell Hooks said, love is an action, it's a verb. And Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is indifference. And Che Guevara said, it is impossible to imagine a true revolutionary not motivated by love. And Cornel West said, what did he say? That justice is what love looks like in public. Or no, maybe I got that wrong. Love is what justice looks like in public. I knew I had it wrong. And so I think thinking about, to me, what's coming up just listening to everyone is, what is our motivation? What is our motivation to make the world a better place? And so in the kind of work I do, yeah, we want to stick it to the oil and gas companies, right? Because they'll do anything to make a buck, even if it, kills people and poisons entire communities. But what's underneath it is not sort of our anger or when we're most effective. What's underneath it is not sort of anger at the bad guys, but love of our communities. And so that just is coming up for me about motivation going forward.
Thank you, Mike. I want to push you a little bit, a polite tap, and really kind of, encourage you to, talk about what that means within that kind of environmental justice space. Yes, there is, folks who we know are, major polluters, gas and oil. But one of the things we also know is that the environment in which people work also have a huge impact on their ability to be healthy. We know that, for example, part of the vector for COVID-19 had a lot to do with the type of environments that people worked in, right? We know it had a lot to do with the type of environments people lived in, right? More dense housing, more spread, more morbidity, more mortality. Those things were all linked together. Yeah. So when you think about environmental justice, even getting outside of maybe its kind of traditional confines, what are you calling people to think about as it relates to environmental justice, partnership, which was your earlier theme, and how do we create kind of a healthier places for folks to live?
So here's one example. So there was a bill that passed that said that where oil drilling was happening, it was passed by a really spectacular coalition in LA. That's where the power came from to get it passed. That there had to be separation from where people lived and where oil and gas was being drilled. And a lot of this was because in communities in LA, there were daycare centers right next literally right next door to where they were drilling, with all the off-gassing of all the toxic chemicals from that drilling. And so it was spectacular that this setback law passed, and almost immediately the oil and gas sector got enough signatures so that now the law was put on hold until after an initiative that's going to be next year, that we have to wait till next year. And so where people are living is being poisoned because of the lack of care about the people who are living there. And so for us to win against things like that, it's going to require, first of all, lots of different kinds of folks to work together, but also to have a long-term strategy that is that's being honest about sort of like the forces that threaten us. And so if you if you're thinking about COVID, they were trying to seed doubt about whether it was real, because division was beneficial to them. And then the same strategy around the example I just gave of around the drilling and next to the daycare centers. So those are some of the things that are on my mind that I think we want to really push on going forward.
Thank you for that, Michael, and allow me to kind of nudge you a little bit to say a little bit more. Nothing you can't say on this particular call that's helpful, and I think in helping to advance multiple causes that are here, because the themes that you all are illuminating are really important. Lisa, I want to come to you. I know you started us off, so I wanted to give you the last on this second round of questioning, in part because your advocacy is a representative about one of the most fundamental rights that we all have. And that's to decide what we can get to do with our own bodies. Like, if you don't have that right, it's like hard to think about what right anybody does have in whatever space that you're actually, doing your work. Yeah, you did a great job giving us a context and telling folks, no, don't sit on your laurels and thinking because we're here in California with all of our blue backgrounds, and that creates a safe space that we don't need to be worried about. In your leaning forward, I know you prefaced this a little bit. You talked about some pending legislation. How are you thinking about the work? How are you thinking about what needs to be done specific to your sector? And what are some of the themes that you would call upon as it relates to your work that you've heard some of your fellow panelists talk about as well? Kind of a three-part. I think you can kind of mix that all in, but let me pass it to you and see what kind of response we get.
Yeah, I mean, it's really an honor to sit on this panel with everybody on and just hearing what my co-panelists have said. I feel like I'm like learning a lot just being here. And I want to touch on, I've been writing a few things down, and for us, we are at sort of an inflection point for our movement. And just to bring everybody together, there is, I think Audre Lorde was saying that there's no single issue struggle, right? Like, none of us have a one-dimensional life. Like, everybody lives sort of this, we don't live like single issue lives. And so the intersectionality is super important. I sort of, I think, Julie, you said in crisis, there's opportunity. And I think for us, I think it's really important to remember that, even under when Roe versus Wade was in place and we had that constitutional right, that did not mean that people had access. And in fact, over the past 10, 20 years, that access, even under Roe, had been chipped away. And particularly for folks of color, folks with low incomes, those folks did not have access to abortion even before the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. And so I think it's really important to really remember that, we do need to follow through on these rights. And I do think, we try to frame our work in sort of a justice framework. And going to kind of what Michael was saying, it's everything relates to folks' ability to live their lives, have autonomy over not just their healthcare, but their lives. And I think Planned Parenthood is not a reproductive justice organization, but we try to, here in California, really frame our advocacy in that justice framework, which is really to make sure that people can, decide not just whether or not they would like to have a child or not have a child, but if they do decide to have children, that they can raise their children in safe and sustainable communities. And so I think, that goes to all of the things that everybody is working on here, and really the importance of nonprofit work, particularly community-based organizations that really do the work one-on-one with people on the ground. And I think I agree with Alberto on we do all have to move beyond advocates to be activists and organizers. I think that is really important. And I think, we can't sit up here, in Sacramento thinking that we're going to be, passing policy without thinking about that and doing that work, like really rolling up the sleeves. I also want to, touch on Julie's point about the importance of arts. Hearts and minds is a big thing. And over the last few years, particularly as we saw that Roe was going to get overturned, I think we really worked hard to change that framework where abortion was stigmatized and people didn't want to talk about it. Abortion is extremely common. 1 in 4 women during their reproductive years in the US have an abortion. And so, there's some really good abortion storyteller organizations, also nonprofits, and their slogan is like, everybody loves somebody that's had an abortion. And that is really true. And we really worked hard to do a sort of hearts and minds campaign to destigmatize abortion. And that work is being done by sort of abortion storytelling nonprofits and other community-based organizations. And really, I think, the use of arts, media, the way abortion has been portrayed in the media has really shifted significantly, even in the last few years. And that really changes the way people perceive it and how people really view, at least, in my world, something that has been stigmatized and not talked about for a really long time. And that does impact policy, right? So I really appreciate sort of this like intersectionality, and I think as nonprofits, like going to Michael's point, like we all have sort of this common public interest. That's why we work at nonprofits, and I think we really do need to sort of move beyond this sort of silos to make sure that we all have this common goal of doing what is right for folks on the ground, and I think it's important to work together on those issues.
Thank you, Lisa, and you a great segue, to this last round of conversation. I'm going to ask Julie to start us off this time as we're sharing that who goes first. Give our colleague some time to think. And in this, because what I thought was going to be really hard about this panel was that you all come from very different spaces, and I think that you really have done an extraordinary job in illuminating and connecting themes that could seem disparate, but really are not. Lisa, I love your comments that no one lives a single issue life. And a full life touches on all the things that we're actually talking about: arts and culture, the ability to live healthy, to be in an environment that's actually healthy, to be empowered and to be able to have voice, particularly within a society that's democratic in its orientation and design, if that's going to be fully realized. In this round, what I would like to ask you each to do, in order to be kind of consultants for a moment to all who have joined us here today, to talk about the 3 things you think are most important for folks to focus on going forward. You talked a little bit about where you were, how you were leaning forward within the work you're doing. I want you to get outside of the box of your own field and area of interest, right? and talk more broadly about this notion of a common theme. You know, us all being in this quest for a more equitable, fair, and just life together. So outside of arts or environment or health or community organizing and building, what do you think are the 3 things that you would say to your colleagues we have got to do in the years ahead? Let me end by framing it this way. California is about to enter a very different period. Lisa, you made mention of a $58 billion deficit. This morning, it was said to be $68 billion. We're about to enter a period where there will be massive decisions made about what the priorities going forward are going to be for a state that's going to have less resources than it had even just a year ago. So with that as context, talking to your colleagues across the nonprofit sector, what are the 3 things that you think at this point, and I assume this will change in the months ahead, that we need to be focused on going forward? Lisa, could you, Julie, could you please start us off?
Sure. And I've been called worse things, so that's all good.
I'm sorry.
And Lisa, I thought of it to you as well. Gosh, it's a tough question, right? Thinking but I think, I mean, what first came to mind, and I loved what you said, Michael, about love, is compassion, number one, and really bringing things down to your local community and to your neighbor and to who have influence over. I think that this is, you know, it's to California in terms of the budget. We also have to recognize we had a massive budget, right? Like it was also gotten really big. So we're probably getting down to sort of what is a more ultimately really a more realistic budget as well. And so it's still a lot of money, and it still needs to be spent in a way that is responsible to our communities and to what are the true needs of our communities, and that can only be educated and illustrated through folks showing up and talking to their elected officials and trying to influence that spent. So I would say that your work and in being activists in your community and whatever it is that you care deeply about, whatever issue it is that you care deeply about, and I think that we've all said here is that they all intersect. You know, we can't be safe in our communities, and we can't, and unless we're really truly thinking about every person, and it shouldn't matter, you know, where they're coming from, any of those things. We should only think about love and how to take care of each other in a safe way. And I think that, you know, so I think we need to be thinking about how we can to activate in a way that also on really stressed out. People are really, we are struggling with what our Surgeon General, right, at this United States, it says is an epidemic of isolation and mental health. And so I think, you know, compassion, I think a lot about slowing down. And I know that sounds really strange. We actually slowed down a bit, right? And we went closer to home and we thought about what was right close to us and who we needed to take care of. And I think that we've gone right back into this really intense productivity and this culture of speed and this race to build more. When I think about the climate and we think about our communities, we need to be thinking less about extraction and more about honoring the land and thinking about the resources that we have and how to ensure that everyone has access to those. And so I don't know, Chad, this is a difficult question. I'm all over the map in this. I feel pretty emotional at the end of as Alberto said, these are dangerous times. If we're going to do anything right now, we probably need to defend democracy also. We need to be thinking about that. We all need to engage because, you know, it's very, very dangerous and difficult time. So I don't know what I just offered there. It's that was a difficult question. Just lead with. I have much wisdom to share, so I'll leave it there.
I appreciate you being and leaning in with your true self. So, you know, it's not, hopefully my intent not to make it complicated was just to keep a little bit of focus. I know we're getting short on time, but so I want to get everybody in on this kind of last round. Michael, 3 kind of things to focus on, words of wisdom, just to kind of set the stage for our nonprofit colleagues who have joined us here in this forum today?
Okay. So one is, when Alberto, when you were talking about dangerous times, one thing I think is for us to be clear-eyed about and not naive about what is being attempted right now to literally at the international level, because oil company executives in the U.S. have much more in common with oil company oligarchs in Russia than they do with working class folks in the U.S. And to be really clear-eyed about one of the things that's underneath the dangerous times. And so to not be naive and look away. So that's one thought I have. A second, Julie, you were talking about compassion. And I think we both, for those of us who, both for folks who are politically progressive like me, but also for folks who are not, for us to not other each other so much. And there's othering of folks who we disagree with politically, but there's also othering of folks who we agree with politically. And so for us to basically up our game on practicing not doing that. And when we do that, we can be a model for other people seeing that. And then I guess the third thing is to there's been no talk about 2024 in the election, and for us to figure out how from the nonprofit space we can be a force of positivity and around that, while also, if you're a C3, of course, there's constraints on that, but for us to really take responsibility for what is going to be happening a year from now.
Thank you, Michael. Lisa, as people were short on time, 3 things that you would offer your colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just going to your question about the budget too, I do think that the budget reflects the state's values. So I really urge all of the folks on this call as nonprofits to make sure that you are advocating for a budget that advocates those values. I also think, speaking on sort of compassion, I do think it's also important not to, everything is so divisive right now. And I think at the end of the day, as human beings, we do share some commonality in terms of compassion, and sometimes that gets lost in the rhetoric. And I, that might be a very optimistic point of view, but I do think that the work we do as nonprofits is really important that we do stay optimistic, because, as I'm going to go back to Julie, your thing about in crisis, there are opportunities, like for, at least for my movement too, like we are at a turning point, and with that comes a great opportunity to build back something that is better, that like reflects our values more, that actually has a better impact on the communities that need it the most. And so I think those are sort of my takeaways is, stay optimistic and let's focus on this opportunity, post-pandemic, and in a place where we are in this sort of at this sort of crisis point with our democracy, that we take this opportunity to build something better.
Alberto, could you close us out with 3 points that you would like folks to take away beyond, the area of your own activity and work, currently?
I will do my best on any given evening along Figueroa off the 110 between Gage and Century. It's about a 2-mile stretch. There are hundreds of girls and women who have been sex trafficked, primarily Black women and girls, some Latina. And there's about 15 motels along that stretch. Those motels are owned. They're not by individuals who rent by the hour and who are profiting off of the exploitation of girls and women. Oftentimes when these Black girls are murdered and killed, they're forgotten and no one searches or looks for them other than the family who may be trying to put a social media post up, and the police department feeling pressured from the community to do something, or the elected officials doing something. I don't know how many lives have lost, how many names have been lost along Figueroa, that we've allowed it to happen. Why is it that we allow these motels to operate in the way that they do year after year in an area that isn't even identified as a community for the 2028 Olympics in our pitch? I think that this very issue is something we're certainly working on at Community Coalition, but has me go back to the question raised earlier in ranking of love. I would ask people to do three things. One is to ask themselves, where does love reside and how is it shared? Does love reside in your address, in your last name, on your block, in your neighborhood, city, state, country, the world? Why do we limit it? What is our social compact? Do we have the kindred spirit that connects us to each other? When folks see 60,000 folks are living on the streets, but they don't want affordable housing built on their neighborhood, or they refuse to acknowledge this issue of sex trafficking in your own backyard, but you want to give to causes international, which are important. I just think we need to ask ourselves, where does love reside and how is it shared? How far are we willing to go to express our love? And I don't think that means that you need to open up your house and invite people in to live with you. But I do think that we do need to ask ourselves this broader question of love as a verb and what we're willing to do. The second thing I would ask folks to do is to do something that requires you to be brave. Do something, you don't have to, Jerry Maguire it and walk out with a goldfish in your hand and leave your job. But do something that requires you to be brave. You don't have to risk your job or lose your life, but do something that requires you to be brave. When was the last time you were brave? Where you walked to something that you were afraid of that was not about you or your career or your job or your ego, but about someone else's livelihood. To be vulnerageous, as the youngsters say, to be vulnerable and courageous at the same time. And last but not least, the third thing I would ask you to do is to support a nonprofit involved in justice. Any of the four of us on here, we would love your support. Beyond the dollar, but show up. Show up. Like they did in the civil rights movement, where folks just came to set up a table. And it all started there. Before they knew it, they were knocking on doors and leading the freedom vote, the freedom drives, freedom summer. So those are the three things that I would ask you. It's been an honor to be here with all of you all. Thank you for sharing the time.
And let me just say as we close out, let me thank our panelists, each and every one of you, for your contribution to this conversation. It was more than about strategy and tactics. Clearly, there was an emotional and a very human character to this that I think we all need and will cherish, along with the words of wisdom. And we also say, just in summary, really quickly, this notion around compassion and love, how we bring it all together, the importance of organizing and seeing about yourself. As the great John Powell says, let's not other people. Let's be the role model for the things that we say we want to see manifest themselves in our communities and across the globe. Let's be activists, engage in activism, and not just building power of organization, but building people power to express their own aspirations and hopes for the future. Let's keep our optimism. Let's be brave and courageous in spaces that it's often hard to be so. And I think, as is apropos for this convening, let's support one another in the nonprofit community and beyond, because the world we seek is an all-in endeavor. And as the great James Baldwin said, not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And with that, we'll bring our session to the close. And I think I'm passing it back to Robert Givens, who will take us into our next session. Thank you all for joining me here today. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Chet. And Julie, Michael, Lisa, and Alberto, this was a wonderful session. I did want to ask maybe one question before we move on, Chet, if we do have time. There's a question in the Q&A, and I'd like to read it to you. Everyone in the panel seems to be coming from the assumption or knowledge that California nonprofit organizations are progressive. I can't believe this is true. There's probably a nonprofit advocating for what they call pro-life, for example. And I wonder how we interact or address these nonprofit organizations.
Well, yeah, our panelists aren't here, so let me just say I'm not speaking for them. But if I was to point out one thing that I think is in response to that is this notion around don't other. You know, people have a right to express their opinion. Let's get out and be activists and organize and push ours. And let's do it with the tools of democracy that are available to us. Let's have the hard conversations and allow people to be in the places what they are. And it doesn't mean you have to give up your orientation or to change your perspective, but it does mean that we have to engage in the democratic process in ways that I think is representative of our commitment to a fair and just society, with the belief that by doing so, what is right and best for most people will actually be achieved, even if there's some level of dissent amongst us about exactly how to do that.
Thanks so much, Chad. That's a wonderful answer.
Thank you. And you have the screen, right?
Thank you. I'd also like to quickly thank our sponsors. Before we move into our 5-minute break, really like to appreciate our gold and silver level sponsors. Right now, we'll be heading into a 5-minute break before our second session, which will be addressing the CalNonprofits Equity Initiative. And so I'd like to move over to the 5-minute break screen, give us 5 minutes, and we will see everyone back on camera in 5.
Hey, everybody, we have one more minute in our 5-minute break. So if you're a panelist in our next session or a speaker, please go ahead and get yourself organized and on camera. We're going to, now it's about 45 seconds, okay, until we start again. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All of our panelists are here and it's exactly 5 minutes and 30 seconds since we said there was a 5-minute break. I'm Jan Masaoka from CalNonprofits again, and I'm very happy to introduce the moderator for our next panel, Anna Hasselblad. And just to let you know something about Anna, she's the policy director for United Ways of California. And she has been one of the real leaders of this contracting campaign. And I know you guys heard so much about it from all of us here, but it really was a group effort, and Anna is one of the people that really was a leader in it. And I want to say that's partnerships with United Ways, for example, and the California Council of Behavioral Health Agencies and others are the reasons why we were so effective this last year. So Anna, take it away and I'll let you introduce your panelists.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, this has been such an excellent symposium, and I'm thrilled to moderate this next session and dive deeper into what is truly a transformative initiative for the nonprofit sector. And just a little bit about me, so you know who this purple-haired person is talking at you. My name is Anna, and it's pronounced like on a mission, so easy to remember and also true. And I have over 20 years experience in the nonprofit sector, and I am mission-driven. And my mission is to drive systems transformation using the approach of targeted universalism. And to translate that, that means we all have a stake in improving the outcomes for all Californians, and we must have an expressly equity-based and informed approach. I have the honor of working with United Ways of California. We're an anti-poverty organization focused on the collective power of communities and advocacy. And as a brief anecdote about my experience, I started in direct services and while I was at that nonprofit, I went to the leadership and I said, I think maybe we should take a position on some advocacy issues that impact the clients that we work with. And I was gently patted on the head and told, no, absolutely not. That's not what nonprofits do. And I didn't stay there very long, I'll tell you that much, because I truly believed that the role of nonprofits, especially those that are embedded in our communities, is to inform the system change that we need to see. And that really led me to my long tenure now in the policy space. And I've been an advocate ever since. So try to tell me no. But my commitment to our shared work and specifically this campaign has been just so robustly led by CalNonprofits and so many in the field. And I'm thrilled to be able to speak with some of you today and share some of the experience and reflect as well as look forward and plot and scheme. And I think that this is just a good opportunity to come together and really unite again in the effort, looking forward and draw upon our experiences in the last couple of years. So what I'm going to actually do is let individuals, as you start to speak, please introduce yourself. That way we can kind of get right into the meat and potatoes or the tofu and potatoes if you're vegetarian. And I won't mispronounce any of your names, which is also important for me. So with that, I am going to go ahead and kind of kick things off. The initiative really launched via a select committee led by Senator Limon and Assemblymember Rivas. We're thrilled to have Senator Limon on the panel today, as well as Assemblymember Hart. But that's really like kicked off the initiative where a whole litany of things that we need to work on as a nonprofit sector to make sure that contracting with the state is equitable and appropriate and meets our needs and creates relationships with the administration that further our collective mission and are equity focused. There was a lot to work on, and there's still a lot to work on, right? So I want to kind of shift into a little bit of reflection, and we have with us Jennifer Fearing, who has been sort of the orchestra conductor, as well as on the ground, making meetings happen, writing legislation, you name it, she had a hand in it. So Jennifer, I'd love to sort of tee you up first to talk a little bit more about the role that you played in CalNonprofits in pulling this together and the origin story of this campaign. So I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you, Anna Mission. I can attest, Anna was a key player in this effort, and I want to just say hi and welcome to so many friendly faces, so many I know from my 9 years now of serving as CalNonprofits Sacramento advocate. Among my most treasured roles as an advocate exclusively for nonprofits here in the state capitol is to serve in this role that unites and tries to protect and grow the nonprofit sector here in California. And so it's been my honor. And this campaign has really been ready, even though I would say we've always seen it as a multi-year, like multi-stage effort. But it has already actually been the culmination of so many years of thoughts that Jan and I have had about trying to find ways to unite nonprofit advocates in Sacramento. There are so many of us working on behalf of our mission-based and organizations or the causes that our donors or our members, if we're a trade association, sort of send us here to work on. But we have common cause and common purpose, and CalNonprofits' unique role in this space is to really identify those and build the power and the ability of nonprofits to function and thrive as organizations and and provide services to their communities. So, as you mentioned, Anna, the origin story of this was goes back actually to the fact that Senator Limón, when she was elected to the Assembly, rising to elected office as a nonprofit leader herself, had the idea, along with us, to form the first select committee on the nonprofit sector in the Assembly. And at that time, Speaker Rendon, also a nonprofit leader prior to serving in office, okayed the creation of this first select committee. Obviously, then Senator Limón rose to the upper house and took that idea with her. And so now we have 2 select committees, one in each house, focused on the nonprofit sector. And in early 2022, as we were trying to limp out of the pandemic phase that really transformed and challenged us all the prior 2 years, the idea was to have this joint select committee hearing that really looked at what did we learn from that experience and how can our organizations and our sector be served by state policy and state investments to thrive more in the future. And we didn't know going into that hearing what themes would emerge, but clarion call, like so many wonderful speakers, I highly recommend revisiting that hearing if you missed it, really emerged from that this very, what might feel kind of wonky, kind of like nuts and bolts need to total improve the way the state contracts business with nonprofits, not just those that clearly have the wherewithal but found it lots of pain points along the process to contract with the state, but also so many nonprofits who are simply, because of contracting practices, foreclosed from opportunities to be partners to the state. It was fundamentally, what emerged was an equity issue about nonprofits, and then ultimately, obviously, that would translate into inequities on the ground for communities that would not get served by those nonprofits. So we pulled this idea of an initiative together. Senator Limón actually jumped out right away with a bill around contract flexibility, which was unfortunately vetoed. And that helped inform our notion of maybe we need to bring a package. We need to unite multiple legislators, lots of organizations, break apart these, tease apart these different issues in contracting into separate policy initiatives, but work collaboratively in coalition with advocates who get it, who know that these little fine tunes to contracting have super meaningful impacts on the ground. And that's what we did. And we also decided as a coalition that we needed a positive frame. And that's something I will talk about a little in the debrief about how much going forward, but that we would emphasize this rather than showing up to complain to government about what they're not doing right, which we might be well within our rights to do, but to frame this as an opportunity for better partnership, that the state has a lot of policy ambitions and that better partnership would mean better outcomes on those ambitions, and that there were benefits both to the government and to nonprofits in changing these policies. So I'll let us take it from here because I know we're going to get into these, but that kind of sets the frame for where we were about this time last year as we were about to launch these legislative initiatives.
Thank you, Jennifer. That is excellent framing. And the committee hearing and the resulting suite of issues and bills, it really deeply resonated with the United Way network. And I know, we were able to get well over, was it 450 other 500 nonprofit organizations in California, y'all. We'll get more of this next year. But it really deeply resonated with our network. And I just wanted to share in particular, we were so excited to co-sponsor AB 590 by Assemblymember Hart. And that really gets at, looking at authorizing advance payments of up to 25% for nonprofits that enter into contracts and putting an emphasis on equity and thinking about what are the nonprofits that, the lack of upfront payments is completely prohibitive. It does not align with their business model because they don't have cash flow like some of the bigger nonprofits do. And I think, United Ways, we have a recognizable name. We come in all shapes and sizes, though. And I can tell you for a fact that I had multiple conversations, and those led into many points of advocacy for our network about the fact that there's a lot of really great contracts that we might be wanting to go after with partners in the community. But because there's no guarantee of upfront payment to get things in place that need to be in place for the program to be successful, we have to say no to compelling mission-aligned opportunities. And I'm seeing nodding, and I think that this is a all too familiar scenario. And it also really straps cash flow. And this might be sort of like, it's definitely on the wonkier side. It's on the business side, but this is how we get our work done. Our ability to commit and fulfill our mission is dependent on our ability to function as an organization. And so this was something that we were really passionate about. And I'd like to turn it over, Assemblymember Hart, to you as the author of AB 590. What reflections do you have on how this bill moved through the legislative process? What it was like to work with the nonprofit equity initiative community? Any reflections that you want to share with folks? Oh, and I believe you are on mute, and I don't have the power to unmute you. Not yet. Robert or someone on the tech, can you unmute the assembly member? We'll get it figured out.
Is
There
that better now? Okay, good. Thanks, Anna, for the introduction. And it's really an honor to be part of this panel discussion. There's some amazing folks here today to share the experiences. It's a pleasure to be working with CalNonprofits, CBHA, the United Way, and really the whole nonprofit community for the strong advocacy that they brought to the table to help ensure that AB 590 was successful. And I also want to thank my partner, and we're overlapping districts. Senator Lamone has just been such a strong ally in this work, and she was a co-author of this measure. I relied upon her expertise working through the legislative process. Also leaned heavily on Jennifer Fearing and her strategic wisdom and vision. And I think the real reason that the governor signed AB 590 into law was the amazing testimony from Leandra at every committee hearing. She was there and really made the case well. I have been involved in working with nonprofits from the public official standpoint for nearly 4 decades of public service in my district, which is Santa Barbara County and South San Luis Obispo County. We have the highest concentration, one of certainly the highest concentrations of nonprofits per capita in the state. There's over 2,000 nonprofits in our district. So I know intimately how critical the service that nonprofits bring to local government and communities in partnership to deliver services to folks who need help in our communities. So when the coalition approached me to author AB 590, I was frankly shocked to learn that so many nonprofits are in this incredibly difficult position of having to effectively loan money to the state of California to cover the cost associated with starting up state grants and contracts. It's just really a backward situation, and it is clearly reflected by the number of agencies and where they are geographically distributed around the state of California, that this is an incredible hurdle to providing equity and geographic equity, and also equity of mission of these nonprofits. Because Many examples came up through the process of working this legislation. The one that stood out the most to me was that one nonprofit paid over $28,000 in interest last year while waiting for payments from the state. Just, the system is broken and we need to reform it. And the equity initiative was a wonderful package of bills that will begin to address those inequities. Fortunately, we didn't get as many passed as we want, but we'll be back next year and have more success, I'm sure. It was clear that having a statewide policy for advance payments was critical to ensuring that all nonprofits serving our communities have fair and equitable access to state funding. The biggest challenge we faced was addressing a narrow advanced payment pilot program that was authorized in the 2022 state budget. Our initial contact with the administration was that they wanted to wait until that pilot project had been completed. They thought that this legislation potentially was premature, but we continue to emphasize the fact that there were over 20 advanced payment programs that have been authorized since the 1970s that were operating successfully, and that there was really no reason to wait. That if we waited, we would just be continuing to put nonprofits in the untenable position of having to wait for payment and advance payment essentially to the state. So trying to reduce this disparity as soon as possible and increase the resiliency of the nonprofit sector was paramount. And I'm just really pleased that the governor's staff, understood that argument and came through. It wasn't just a gentle push. There was a lot of people working really hard behind the scenes to make the case and to get that information to the governor's staff and to the governor. And I just really want to thank all the stakeholders and the nonprofits for their support. And I also really want to thank Governor Newsom for signing this really important legislation into law. It's a great start, and we've got much more work to do, but it's good to have a success to begin next year's efforts.
Absolutely. And that's the momentum that we are all definitely taking with us and building on. And we're grateful for your authorship of that bill and the ability also to tell the story of what nonprofits are experiencing. And so with that, I'd like to turn to Leandra with the California Council of Community Behavioral Health Agencies to talk a little bit about how CBHA, as we typically call it, got involved in this campaign. As noted, you've been a leading voice in this issue area, and your team was incredible. And the network of agencies that are part of your organization do incredible, important work at the local and community level. So how does CBHA get involved in this campaign? What motivated it? What impacts would the proposed changes have on your organization? There's still lots to do. What do you want to see? Take it away. Let us know what you think.
So much to say and so much to share. And thank you for the kind words, everyone. I want to start off by thanking CalNonprofits for really raising the awareness and proposing the suite of legislation, including AB 590. I'm a proud board member, and I just watched the staff. I watched the internal process. I watched the relationship with legislators and other champions. And it was just really, it's a beautiful story to tell about how we got here and really had the right people in the right places. And I want to start also by thanking Senator Limon and the other chair of the hearing for starting this hearing with a focus on CalNonprofits, with a focus on the nonprofit sector and what was happening. It was so important and timely, as many of our member agencies who we represent were coming out of, or maybe even in the middle of the pandemic years, which arguably we're still weathering that storm. But it was so important to have that opportunity to talk about the plight, the current day activities, the situation, and really highlight the important work of nonprofits. Now, during the hearing, one of the chairs described nonprofits as, quote, the heart and the backbone of California's workforce. And I thought that was so poignant and true. The heart and the backbone, those are really vital, parts of your body. And we have to honor nonprofits and their work like the vital organs and structures that they are. Also want to thank our champion, Assemblymember Hart, for authoring this important bill. Legislators have choices over who they work with and what they do. And Assemblymember Hart's office was wonderful to work with. So we're so grateful for that. So we joined our partners at United Way because honestly, it made sense. We wanted to co-sponsor this measure because it was applicable to all of the folks that we represent. And CBHA represents behavioral health clinics across the state that provide mental health, substance use disorder, developmental disability, housing. Some of our members run mobile crisis and hotlines. We do it all, right? So for us, it was just a common sense thing to do. many of our members, because of the diversity of services that they provide, they exist off of blended funding or braided funding, as we, call it colloquially, from county contracts to donations and grants. And grants are really a part of what helps sustain some of these programs and to fill in gaps when contracts are not renewed or expected funding, doesn't materialize and falls through. So this soft money oftentimes is critically important in keeping businesses in operation, especially nonprofits, and especially during the pandemic time when there were so many other funds being diverted to other services and crises happening. So, for example, we know that there's been a lot of impacts to our community-based organizations as a result of the pandemic. So it's so important that our members be able to access funds quickly. For example, right now, we've had recent payment reform efforts across the state, and we're seeing really crisis situations with our members where they're not able to access payments, or the payments that they're used to are not coming in at the same amount. And so we need grant funding. We need other money to be able to assist agencies in need, and most importantly, to trickle down so that they can provide services to disenfranchised populations and the diverse Californians that so many of them are committed to serving. Nobody goes into this work because they want to be, rich, right? It's really heart work, but we have to make sure that, again, those vital structures and organs that the nonprofit providers represent are treated as such, right? We take care of our heart, we take care of our back, because it holds everything together. So we saw AB 590 as a solution to this, and we are so grateful to see it where it's at. We're so grateful to also have conversations about next steps and where we might need to go, but that's why we got involved. It was a no-brainer for us.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there was a call to many nonprofits in this package, and it did strike into the heart of our work. And I love that analogy. I'm going to turn now to Martine with the Children's Institute to share a little bit from your perspective. Thinking about what does contracting look like right now for nonprofits? What are some of the impacts of the policy win that we got? But what remains to be done too? I think that there's a lot of issue areas that we can focus on, and thinking about, how we're leveraging our success, and also leaning further into Senator Limon's bill, the Prompt Payment Act, and thinking about what comes next and how that's going to impact your ability to do your organization's work.
Thank you so much. And we are proud members of CBHA, and I'm also a proud board member of CBHA. So it's one big happy family here. I'm here sort of as the poster child, I guess, for the nonprofits, to talk about what it's really like. And it's just delightful contracting. I mean, I'm kidding. There's something I wanted to mention. The Assembly member talked about agencies that need to use a line of credit. So we're a very large agency. We're $100 million in revenues. We have about 1,000 employees. Our interest payment, now that interest rates have gone up, is $50,000 a month. So if you give us a donation, that's where your money's going. It's going to a bank. And furthermore, that is a non-allowable cost in all of our government contracts. That is why it's being paid for with charitable funds, which is really criminal, I think. It is not how we should be using those precious dollars that should be going to developing innovative ideas, filling gaps, enhancing the programs that the government contracts, permit us to do. It should not be going to the bank. So that is one of the realities that we've got to do something about. I have some ideas outside of the legislative process about how that might happen. But again, I mean, to the point that Anna made earlier, think about who's excluded from contracting. It is not just the complexity and the sort of forbidding nature of the compliance, but people who don't have credit can't do this. Small organizations that can't even get a line of credit can't do this. So I guess I should be happy I'm paying 7.5% because at least I've got a line of credit. And I think that there's other issues around contracting where we're just not treated equally to other organizations that do the same work. We're just not. We are, I mean, I don't need to persuade this panel that we're an essential part of the ecosystem. That came through loud and clear during the pandemic when we did the true safety network. And yet, why are we struggling all the time for sustainability? It makes no sense, because the government and of course the communities rely on us. Also, Anna, I don't think the topic of cash is wonky. I think it's probably one of the few things that everybody understands. You know, if you don't have the cash, you can't operate. The final thing I would say is that, you know, as I said, there's other practices. We've had some contracts, for example, that we knew were going to sunset or that might renew and might get rebid. And in one case, this past fiscal year, we worked all year with the county department in this case, but it was a pass through for state funding, to find out, was this contract going to be extended or renewed, or what was going to be the procurement process. We asked and we asked month after month after month until we finally laid the staff off with 60 days notice, because that's our practice and we want to be fair and equitable to our own workers. And on June 15th, 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year, we were told, oh no, it's fine. We're gonna keep funding you. Well, by then we couldn't do the program. Everybody had been placed in a new job. So there's a way in which, and again, this is not happening intentionally. I certainly don't think, and there's bad actors, you know, sitting around thinking like, how can we torture nonprofits? But I do think that it's a lack of imagination sometimes about how we really operate, and you know, a kind of lack of respect when we raise these issues, that ends up putting unnecessary stress on the organizations and on the individuals.
Thank you, Martine. And I'm guessing that there are many nonprofit staff and leaders that are listening in and participating and saying, oof, I recognize that. I feel that. I know those decisions. I know that stress. And when you do hard work, it is incredibly difficult to make those business decisions that are not in alignment with your mission. I am really excited to be able to turn to Senator Limon, who has been, as Jen noted at the beginning, a stalwart champion and deeply familiar with the needs of the nonprofit sector. And curious to sort of get your perspective on some of this, seeing how things happened in the 2023 legislative session, and as chair of the Select Committee on Nonprofit Sector, what do you envision in 2024 to continue the momentum of this effort? And how might that Select Committee continue to play a critical role? We really want to hear from you about what you're seeing and thinking.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thank you for organizing this and having this important conversation. I think, you know, 2024 is going to pick up on a little bit of 2023. I think something that was the first time we did, and Jennifer kind of alluded to this, is we actually put together a package of bills. And doing so was a strategic and thoughtful move on the part of those of us that advocate for the nonprofit sector in a targeted way. We haven't done that since the time that I've been in the legislature, and I'm finishing my 7th year, approaching my 8th year in the legislature. And I think that that was something that yielded really good outcomes. In the past, we had run bills that impacted the nonprofit sector individually, but I think that our collective effort ensured that we were able to get some wins, knowing that we don't get all. Most packages that move forward together don't all get sign, and certainly that's something that we saw. I think the other piece is that you're going to hear a significant conversation in 2024 as it relates to the budget. 2023 is a year where we did have a budget deficit, but it was one that we were able to deal with in a way that did not impact folks in a heavy manner. But I think that 2024 will be a different year, and we will also need to collectively work together to understand what that means to the nonprofit sector and what areas we can continue to discuss and work on that won't impede or stall some of the progress that we've seen. I think that that's an element that will be new, but I also feel that now, 7 years in, not just by having a select committee in both houses, but 7 years in between the select committees that exist and the legislation that we've been running, we've started to kind of educate and inform and set a precedent for the legislature. The legislature knows now that there are bills that are running in this space, that hundreds of constituents, if not thousands of constituents in their district are impacted by these bills. And I think they're coming to expect something. I suspect that we should probably, as a select committee, be intentional about what our hearing topics are in 2024. They will be our public opportunity to have a discussion on record about some of the issues that impact us as a nonprofit sector and as, nonprofit advocates. So I think that those are some elements that will be important for 2024. I was very proud that we were able in 2023 to work in a unified manner on our advocacy and on legislation. And I hope that that continues. The tone may change, but I hope that that uniformed approach is something that continues in 2024.
Absolutely agree on that point. And I think that that was that approach, particularly with the administration having a very clear, united message, was welcomed. And we came to the table ready to talk about what these things mean and how we can implement them successfully. And we're going to continue to do that. And being able to put it on the public record, like you said, is huge. And that means a lot also to the nonprofit sector. It means a lot to be heard and seen and valued and verified. So we really appreciate that. I'd love to continue, Senator Limon, to hear from you a little bit more about the path that you see forward on SB 557 to improve and expand the California Prompt Payment Act. We're really eager to see that move forward into a successful place and continue conversations about how we get that signed into law. But want your perspective on what's next for that.
Right. So I will say that the conversations around the Prompt Payment Act are not over, despite a veto. I think sometimes in the legislature, kind of the more, as you go through the legislature, there's bills that have to be brought forward multiple times in order to get that. So I think that the veto is a signaling of where the governor and his team is at, but I think that with the right approach, we can still move it forward. And I think that we will have those conversations. There's conversations of whether that is going to go through the legislative process or whether there is another vehicle for that to go through. I think that what will happen this year with the Prompt Payment Act is, again, I think it's going to be embedded in a conversation around the budget. Most policy this year is going to have a more significant connection with the budget this year in 2024, I think, than it might have had in 2023. But this is still an issue that matters for a lot of us. I think that we, as an advocacy group of nonprofits, will have to be very clear on what our priorities are. And what we feel would be important to get out in 2024. And certainly I hope that this is one of them. And how we get our priorities out, how we advocate for them is going to take, as I've said, a united front, but also more work from many of our nonprofits. I think that there are times where we rely significantly on the lead nonprofit agencies, on our association like CalNonprofits to do the heavy lifting. But in a year where things might be a little bit different with the budget, we might want more folks. I asked myself, are all 150 plus people that are on here, did we all send an email, right? Did everybody send an email to their legislators and ask for this to be supported? This is where I think we may have a more significant role if we are all collectively doing this, as opposed to only relying on the big nonprofits, the lead nonprofits, our association to be the voice. In a time where things get tough, we need to hear multiple voices. So no matter how big or little or involved or not involved or experienced or less experienced nonprofits we are, your voice should be at the table if we feel these issues are important. So an email, a letter, a sign-on letter from your region, to the legislators who represent your region is going to be very, very critical in 2024. Expressing what the priorities are. We always know we don't get everything we ask for. That's true for nonprofits as it is for every other sector, as it is for legislators. And so I think we want to prioritize and see how we focus our energy. And that will be a conversation I'm sure you all will lead with CalNonprofits.
Thank you. And that actually feeds, you just like fed right into the next thing that I was going to bring up for the entire panel so nicely, which is starting to think about what are we going to draw from the campaign effort in 2023, carry it over into 2024, and what are we going to do a little bit different? And I think the focusing on the each nonprofit understanding their power and connection to decision makers and telling the story of a nonprofit at the local level is so huge. And those meetings can take place in district. They can be over coffee with a staffer. They can be an invitation to come see a site visit or a special event. And then you can highlight the critical role of a clear and equitable partnership with the state government. And some of the solutions may in fact be more on the administrative side. And so I think we're very open to how all those things move forward. So I'm going to stop talking, open it up to others. I might tee up Jennifer to kick things off here, but how can we modify our efforts? What do we need to do to make 2024 more successful? Tell us your thoughts.
Well, I believe in radical candor, so I'm here to lay some out here. Number one, let me just say that in addition to Senator Lamone and Mr. Hart, there were 5 other legislators that each carried bills in our package. You can learn more about the details of each of those bills and their staffs. We met every other week together in a unified way and worked collaboratively on these. And I just want to call out the California legislature for totally getting it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't, there are all kinds of reasons to keep those copies up and keep those stories going and examples and connections going for this purpose, but there wasn't a single no vote. Many of these bills moved on consent, as the same notion that Mr. Hart just expressed was very common with like a what? Like, this is how we're doing this, like some frustration, because ultimately these bills, each and every one of them are about like us basically talking to the state government and which is run by the administration, more the executive branch. And with the exception of 2 of the bills, and I won't get into those details, none of these actually need to be changes in statute fundamentally. Fundamentally, there's authority within the administration and the executive branch to just decide to issue a fiat, an executive order, or a change in policy to effectuate these things. So my thoughts moving forward is that we have more work to do. I know we have friends all over state government. I heard from so many different employees that work within state grants administration or contracts, or who have outreach responsibilities of just the pain points for them. They're all the same pain points that we feel. So I know that we have allies all across state government, but we still have our work cut out for us convincing the Department of Finance that these kinds of changes are in the state government's best interest, that they are not costly and especially in this budget year that Senator Lamone is speaking to, it's going to become even more important and frankly more challenging to figure out how to articulate these things as cost effective rather than more costly to the state. And I think some of that is about tying the impact that these changes have to our delivery of services. The state is ultimately giving us money and paying for services. How these are tying up those funds and they're wasteful, and it's more money would ultimately be available for the services rather than on the kind of administrivia and bureaucracy, at least on the effectuating. So I think all of us needing to think about how to tell this story and use our relationships with secretaries of departments, with with agencies, directors of departments, governors' appointees, and frankly, at the highest level, we need folks in philanthropy to roll with the nonprofit sector with this as a priority. We know the governor has an interest in both what our sector thinks, but obviously what funders. They have political capital that's unique from nonprofits, and them elevating these needs and priorities is going to be critical, I think, for us moving forward. But I do really want to thank and acknowledge and say how refreshing it was at how many legislators really, really got it and really want to be there for our sector.
Yeah, so I'm hearing being a little bit more directive to the administration. Any other thoughts that folks want to share about what we want to take into 2024 for this effort?
I think that it's a great opportunity to, I'm sorry, it's something overheard. Please go ahead.
Oh, no, you go right ahead, Leandra.
I was just going to say quickly, I think part of what led to success with the package is that we all put our specific kind of sector aside, right? And I think there's really a lot of strength when we're all able to see cross-cutting issues that impact you, whether you're a behavioral health organization or any other type of nonprofit, and being able to focus on what are the things we have in common, right? And this was a great example of that. So the ability to try to do that, I think, is going to really enhance our efforts to be successful. And we have to keep focusing on what are the things that are impacting us all, regardless of what our business focus is, and I think that's really the beauty of having an association like CalNonprofits that brings people together, because it allows us really to have that forum and that focus to say, what are the commonalities? Let's lift those up. And I think, legislators can comment, but, I know oftentimes when our organization advocates for things, we get really good feedback when we're together with a coalition of folks who have different types of places in the world, but who all come together around a policy issue that's impacting them all. So I just wanted to add that, because I think that that approach is really instrumental and will be key as we move forward as a group.
Yeah, and I just add, I really think that the broad coalition of support for AB 590 was the key to its success. There were over 500 nonprofits speaking up about the bill. As Jennifer mentioned, there was broad bipartisan support in the legislature, tremendous champions. The work that Senator Lamone and Assemblymember Luz Rivas had done before with the chairs of the Select Committee on Nonprofit Sectors are all part of the dynamic that made that bill successful. But I do think Monique's point about the budget is really critical. In a year that's going to be very difficult and there will be painful choices, we need to have a place where we can say yes and do things. And I think making the case to the administration that this is not additional cost, but this is efficiency, and this is a way to deliver services at lower cost to the state of California, that is the sweet spot of this next upcoming budget year, because things that have a price tag are going to be very difficult to digest. And if we can frame this properly with the right kind of support from the right kind of people that have influence with the administration, I think we could be in a really good place to take advantage of the tough moment and turn this into an opportunity for us to advance the package in a way that might have not been possible in other years.
Yeah, well, I think we are all as advocates thinking about how to apply some of these lessons and thoughts moving forward. And I think the point about leveraging the budget process, but also thinking about how we can translate things into actions that the administration can take outside of legislation or the budget process, and making this an easy lift where possible, and clarifying the opportunities for efficiencies and how that does everyone a favor, including the state government, is going to be key. And in the sort of vein of radical candor, I'm going to bring up something that I'm super excited to talk about. Okay, we know nonprofits work in partnership with pretty much every single state department, agency, et cetera. Cross-cutting. There's a nonprofit partnering with every state agency. Okay, great. It's fantastic. We do a lot of good stuff. Love it. Some problems that we've identified we'd like to fix, right? But there's no centralized home for nonprofits to engage with the state on common matters like contracting. So when you look at like the business sector, commercial sector, they have a lot of access and influence on the administration. I think most notably, we would point out something like GoBiz or the Labor Department. So I want to throw it out to this team of very smart and influential people themselves to say, why do you think there isn't a Go Nonprofits? And what would it take to create something like that? Is that something we should do? So whoever wants to take it first.
Well, I'll vote yes. I'm very involved in sort of similar initiatives at the county level here in LA. And there is an office being created. Nobody wants to create a new commission and a new thing, but there is a recognition that there needs to be a locus of connection between the government and the nonprofit sector, and to sort of kind of continually solve problems and remove barriers. And it's not a one-shot thing. So I think it's incredibly important at the state level.
Yes, and I would echo that. I think it's very important at the state level, and I want to say that we don't have it not because we haven't discussed it and then we haven't tried. I think that there have been conversations about what it would be like to have a liaison in every department or the most utilized departments, right? We've done this, we've looked at it. And we just haven't gotten there, but I think that conversation continues. I think one of the things about the legislature is just in the same way that, you know, the budget looked different 4 years ago, and as it probably is going to look in 2024, there are, you know, ebbs and flows of the legislature. But what's really important is that even when we're not able to get the wins or the desired outcomes that we'd like in year one, that we understand that every conversation we're having, every topic of a hearing, every sign-on letter, it serves as really creating part of a foundation that helps us get there eventually. So the way that I see it is that these conversations, this kind of energy and synergy around some of this, including having a go nonprofit, not just a go biz, right? It is something that we hopefully will be able to work towards. And even if it is a bad year, if we understand this, or a difficult year, you know, as it relates to the budget, that we understand all of these conversations and our priorities as being something that, while we may not see a short-term win, you know, the goal is to have short-term outcomes, but also to keep building that foundation for the long term. And so hopefully, I do hope that by the time I leave the legislature, we would be able to see who that person is, who that contact is for nonprofits in so many agencies that already have one for small businesses, but that don't for nonprofits. We've said this repeatedly. You all know this. The nonprofit sector is the 4th largest employer of our economy and here in this state. As such, it makes economic sense to have a liaison in the departments which have the most interaction with the nonprofit sector that can guide, advise, and direct our nonprofits in the right directions as it has to do with compliance, with regulation, and with budget and grant opportunities.
Yeah, I strongly
Absolutely.
agree. I think that Monique's exactly right. And Jennifer said this earlier too, that many of the things that were in the equity initiative could have been done by the administration if they chose to. We could do it legislatively, or we could do it just by changing state regulations, and having that presence within the administration that they own the challenge and the opportunity would make a difference systemically. And that's really what we want to achieve. We don't want to be having to push the rock up the hill every time and going through the legislative process with each individual bill. Better to have the administration as a partner, working from the inside out with the support of the legislature and all the nonprofit community around the state. That's the way we're going to make real systemic change. And I think this is pivotal and critical to that strategy.
And I'll just chime in to say, when I started in my role as Sacramento advocate now close to 10 years ago, I'll never forget Jan Masaoka giving me my primary marching orders. And that is that every single time a member of the legislature or anyone in government says, oh, but how will this impact small businesses? That they changed that to say, how will this affect small businesses and nonprofits? And that has been one of our guiding kind of strategic principles. We're chipping away. I think that our presence and that effort is transformatively different than it was a decade ago. But we are still moving forward. And I'll just so that I think GoBiz does their very best. I think a lot of folks in state government do their very best where they can. I recall during the pandemic where there were various grant programs coming out and small business relief programs that we were effectively able to get nonprofits equally eligible for, rolled out with applications that asked us to put who the owner was and their social security number. And we were like, we don't have those. And they do their best. And frankly, they're learning as they go. And maybe someday there will be a joint desire for an office for this, simply because there's become a recognition that we are at the size that we are, as Senator Limon said, and that we are a different being that needs that kind of support and engagement to make successful. I think that we should lay the seeds and have laid the seeds for that, Anna. So I'm glad you called out a very specific idea to be aspirational towards in one form or fashion. It all goes back to really having the government more fully understand, and us using every opportunity to describe how we are like businesses and how we are different and unique, and how we need the state to have as much interest and ability to try to support our thriving and surviving as they do take in making sure the business sector is successful.
Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts on that. And we are starting to round into the sort of final section for this session. And I just want to reflect too that I think a lot of nonprofits, we do have good partnerships with state agencies, and we know the staff well, and they oftentimes want to find solutions just like us. And so the ability to actually centralize some of that effort is going to create efficiencies as well as opportunities for the state to live into their values of equity and the executive order that the governor has signed specific to that. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity in addition to the realities that we need to be very clear-eyed around the budget, et cetera. But so I've got one last question for y'all before I close us out. And that's really, this is call to action time. If there is one message that you want the nonprofit community to hear from you about this work, the commitment to our shared vision, what is it? What is the call to action that you want to share? And I'm going to go ahead and hope that everybody wants to chime in on this one, and then I'll close us out.
I'll just say we have to grow the campaign. We have to put down our individual industries and businesses and think about what's good for everyone and what we all have in common, and really lift that up together. I think without that, we're stuck in our silos, and in a post-pandemic kind of period, and knowing how many Californians depend on the services of nonprofits, we can't afford to be in our individual corners. So I do hope to see even more nonprofits step up to the stage in various different ways, in multi-pronged ways, whether that's, like some have said, local, calling your locals, or participating in state level advocacy as well.
And I will go ahead and echo that and just say that my one is speak out. This is a year where you're going to want your voice to be heard. And in order to grow that coalition, to, make those, advancements and the campaign as well, a growing campaign, you got to speak out, you got to be involved.
Yeah, and I just add that early and often too, the legislative year starts to go so quickly when we finally get to the place where things are moving. So timely placed op-ed pieces at the beginning of the year can help frame and shape the conversation that begins, really in January. And so waiting until the end when we're trying to get bills signed into law by the governor and putting the forces to work at that stage are really critical and important. But starting earlier and having it be a consistent, systemic lobbying effort would really pay dividends in a much more dramatic way. And I'm committed. I know Senator Limon is. I know that our legislative colleagues are. And so I think working together, we can achieve really big things this year.
I would just, all of the above, we are businesses. I mean, this just because we don't pay taxes and we can raise money doesn't mean we're not businesses and not subject to all of the challenges and opportunities that business has. Also, I think that it's very important to frame these cost questions, because we do need our full costs paid in terms of access and services. What do we end up doing? We serve fewer people, and that translates to lives that are not accessing critical services. Our Head Start funding, for example, nothing to do with the state, it's federal funding, but it's going down. It's going back to the 22-23 rates for the next 3 years. All we can do is cut slots. And it's sanctioned by the federal government. They understand that. But every cut and every challenge to our budget just means we're serving fewer people.
I think I'll just close by agreeing with all that it was said and adding every conversation is an opportunity to lift these kinds of things up with key folks and decision makers, either locally or at the state level. I'll add a new concept, which is I think we need to show the implementation of AB 590 as a resounding success for both parties. I don't think that we can, I often tell my clients that getting a bill signed into law is being up at halftime and going into the locker room. Like, you got to play the rest of this. You've got to get these things implemented. And the governor's signing message for AB 590 left a little question mark about whether that pilot idea is still lingering there. So I'd love to see us make sure we're educating all nonprofits in the state about their right to access and ask for this, and bringing it up. And we've got to spread the word. And then we need to show that and find a way to tell the story of the successes that it's having, the members of CalNonprofits and other nonprofits who are getting contracts now that they weren't getting before, the difference that advance payments is making. That is going to translate into our ability to sell the other reforms that we desperately need.
Awesome. Well, perfectly timed all. Thank you very much for the compelling perspectives. And I hope folks that are, tuning in are ready to double down on these efforts in 2024 and do a little bit more and lean in and recognize that, yes, it's going to be a rough budget year, but we are focused on serving our communities and fulfilling our mission and doing so in a way that does respect our staff and our way of business and our way of operating, being shoulder to shoulder with philanthropy and really communicating clearly with the administration. Those were a couple of the key things that I heard out of this, and also just a ton of enthusiasm about the work and what's next. We've got a lot of ways that we can accomplish things, and I have a feeling this campaign and initiative is going to go at all of them. Yeah, we're partway through the game. We just hopefully got the pep talk, right? This was the locker pep talk. All right. Everybody ready to go? Yes. With that enthusiastic note, and technically 2 minutes before our time, I'm actually going to go ahead and pass it back to Joel with CalNonprofits. But I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Senator Lamone. Thank you, Assemblymember Hart, and for the rest for sharing your perspective. There's lots to do, and there's lots of energy to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And I just want to thank all the presenters today. As you can see, the nonprofit sector is just filled with talented, wise, amazing leaders. They really offer hope to all of us and to our state. And I want to thank them for their contribution to this symposium, but more importantly, their contribution to making California better. I now would like to introduce you to Jeff Green, and we're so excited that he will be the next CalNonprofits CEO starting next month. The board spent literally more than a year in a national search for Jan's replacement, and we spent many, many meetings discussing the future of nonprofit sector, the future of CalNonprofits, and the direction we want to go. It's always a difficult journey to replace such a long-term successful leader like Jan. Literally hundreds of wonderful leaders applied to lead CalNonprofits, and with a meticulous process, we landed on Jeff. And Jeff has been on the CalNonprofit board for many years, and he was actually the chair of the board twice. And while the chair, he was instrumental, along with Jan and her staff, as you've heard, in helping the California State Assembly and Senate create the first ever select committee on the nonprofit sector. So Jeff, we would love for you to share some words.
Thank you so much, Joel. I don't know about you all, but I day like this, I get all excited. So I'm feeling good here 3 hours in. And I want to first say thank you to everyone who's been part of today. As we close out the convention, and of course this is online, it would be lovely to see you all in person. And I'm hopeful that in the near term we'll get a chance to gather. I'll certainly be traveling up and down the state and hope to have some time with many of you. So first, thank you. This is what this is all about, and days like this really energize our work, our movement, and of course, each of us personally, I'm hopeful of that. Secondly, I want to thank Jan. For more than a decade of leadership, Jan's been a colleague, she's been a friend, she's been a mentor to myself and many of us, a co-conspirator at times. And although she's moving on from the CEO position, I can assure you that we have not heard or seen the last of Jan Masaoka. And of course, I know you didn't need me to tell you that. But we look forward to collaborating in an ongoing way. Many of us, we've come to CalNonprofits in different ways. I'll share briefly. I first met CalNonprofits in the search for decent healthcare for my employees in a very small regional social justice funder in the Central Coast here back in the 1990s. At the time, it was the Fund for Santa Barbara that I was working with, motto of change, not charity. And I was always looking for those places where policy and activism and service met. And of course, nonprofits have been at the leading edge in advocating for social justice and access to education and healthcare and economic opportunity and vibrant artistic communities and environmental protection. We know the list goes on. And we as a sector continue to demonstrate that. And I know that we demonstrate constantly that some of the most exciting, innovative, entrepreneurial work happens right here under our roofs, with service, organizing, and policy all intersecting. So for me, CalNonprofits has been that place, that home of sorts for many years. And so looking ahead, when we talk about how we do our work, we do really three main things. We offer resources to the sector, and that's information, access to funding, connections with policymakers, et cetera. We map the sector. Jan mentioned at the outset, and many of you are familiar with Causes Count, the report that we did in 2017 and again in 2019. And I can tell you we're working on an update of that report. And of course, what today's about, which is the policy work. And this year we tried a new strategy. You just heard a lot about it, of running a slate of bills together. I think we all feel really good about that. Of course, Assemblyman Hart's AB 590 got across the finish line and signed by the governor. Senator Limon's bill as well, though vetoed. And so we realized that this is a way to galvanize energy. So I want to thank all the panelists who just finished, because we know that this works. And the other thing we know is that many of our colleagues don't know or don't engage or may have intentionally been miseducated about the role they can play in policy. I assume that everybody that's here is absolutely engaged in policy, or at least interested in being part of it. And so we know that this is an important part of our work, but I also would ask that we all be those ambassadors to help our colleagues explain, because the power of the sector, I would argue, is just barely being tapped at this point. And it's as much progress as we've made in the last decade and in the last year. There's so much more that we can do. And then there's lots of reasons, of course, that we do this policy work, whether it's just setting the rules of the game. And of course, when we say the game, we have to put that in quotes, because for many in our communities, the work we do is not a game at all. In fact, it can be just a sheer matter of survival. So making sure that we all operating in an equitable way. The other is the scale that we can bring to bear here. And I really appreciate what Leandra said in this last panel, which is, common cause across our subsectors. People ask me what this new role is, and I explained CalNonprofits to those who don't know, and I often find myself saying something to the effect of, we do that really important, not always sexy, but critical work behind the scenes to make sure that policy really serves the sector. And the other thing I always think about is just the sheer scale of what we do. If you look at public spending versus nonprofit expenditure across the entire country, we're typically at a 20-to-1 ratio. So for every dollar we're spending in the nonprofit sector, there are $20 being spent in the public sector. And the reality of that means that, if that $1 is well spent, it can influence the spending of those other 20. But of course, on the flip side, if we're always playing defense, and we all know this from experience, there's no way that one well-spent dollar can undo damage or harm done by 20 that was spent in a wrong direction or wasted or otherwise used. So if we can leverage that and we can do it through policy, we know that that's a big one. And of course, finally, the funding piece and the dollars and cents. And I know many of us have used this, and I typically do as well, as a way to explain why it's so important. But we've often been complimented on our work, and we've been told how important and how valuable it is. And then we're always watching for what does the budget say. So you can compliment the work, but if the dollars aren't there, then those are just words. And we know that, budgets are reflections of value. So CalNonprofits is a champion for that. And of course, another favorite is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We know how that looks. And so our commitment is that we make sure that everyone in our sector and all the communities that we serve are truly at the table. And I think that one of the unique things we can do is we can recognize that the power of the nonprofit sector and the organizations to build political power and bring resources to communities that have been marginalized, that have been robbed of resources, or otherwise politically disenfranchised. And we know that organizations that rise from these communities that are truly of, by, and for have tremendous power and often are building the tools that later get used in policymaking. And so we're not blind to that, and we're not confused about that. That innovation, that leadership that comes out of our communities is exactly what we want to see rising into positions of leadership and ultimately policymaking. The good news, as we look for allies and train leaders to be better allies, is that we have some tremendous ones in our state legislature, and you just heard from two of them. And I'm proud to say, just as a side note, that they are both my elected officials here in the Central Coast. So I have a wonderful senator and assembly person I like to work alongside, but they're not alone, as you've heard, and there are many allies that we have in our legislature. So in the coming days, the board is going to be gathering and getting together to talk about our future directions. And so I want to, among my colleagues, welcome your ideas, your thoughts. For you that are longtime members of CalNonprofits, what are the things that the organization has done that you found particularly useful? And for newer members, what are the things that would be valuable for you? What could a statewide association of over 10,000 members bring to bear on your work to make it stronger? We know that one out of every 14 jobs in the state is a nonprofit job. We're the fourth largest employer and the fourth largest economy in the world. And so we know that what we do matters. So I just want to say thank you. I really look forward to working alongside you all in the coming year, in the new year. And so I'll just say an early Happy New Year and hand it back to our board chair, Joel.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you everyone for being part of this CalNonprofits annual policy convention. As you've heard, we here at CalNonprofits want to promote change, emphasizing themes that you've heard today, themes like creative approaches and struggle and unity and compassion and partnerships and equity. And as you've heard today, we want to become advocates, but not just advocates, but activists and organizers that strengthens the nonprofit sector and betters our state. So I hope you'll be part of our vision and our movement. And I hope you continue to be part of CalNonprofits efforts throughout the next year. If your organization hasn't yet, please join CalNonprofits and continue to help us advocate and activate for real change. Our website is calnonprofits.org. Thank you again for being with us. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.